Right, so here we are, after several months hiatus. Back
4 months?
I think it's been about 4 or 5 months, something in the area. Back, Friday night, Rants and Bants.
On a Friday night. Same joke as always.
But this time, we're going to a bit of a different topic.
Yeah.
We're covering the entire Devil May Cry series.
We're not going to make any false promises here like we did with Silent Hill, guys.
Yeah, there's not going to be a big break, and we're just going to not talk about the other ones.
Exactly.
Which probably will come eventually.
It is coming, guys. 2026, I believe, is the release date for that.
We'll get to that point eventually.
When the new one comes out.
Yeah, that's going to happen. So, now my first question, my first order of business is, who is best girl?
Lady.
There you go.
Easy. Knew it before it was going to leave your lips. Lady, best girl, DMC3 lady.
Well,
dare I say, best lady.
Whoa. Woo.
Best lady.
See, so that's a bold claim, because DMC is known for its quality waifus.
No. Lady is the supreme waifu.
Okay.
You come at me with any other waifu in this series, I will fight you.
Okay, well, I mean, there you go. That's the show. Thanks for listening, guys. We're all done.
It's all done.
We'll catch you next time.
So DMC3, 11 out of 10, best waifu. All the rest are 9s, except for 2. We didn't play that one.
Excuse me. You didn't play that one.
Oh, go away with you. I didn't play it on your recommendation.
To be fair, most people should not play it. I think it's more of a...
I will play it eventually out of morbid curiosity, but...
Yeah, it's not a pleasant experience.
Well, considering the fact that I tried DMC like immediately after DMC5 and made it like 2 levels in.
Well, the problem is you played it after 5, though.
Well, that is fair.
Like, if you played it after like 5 years of waiting after DMC4, you probably would be less inclined to drop it so quickly.
Yeah, I mean... Fair, I guess, but I suppose, like, I would like to think that a part of me would also be, like, more disappointed.
Well, that's true as well. Yeah, I understand that.
Going from the, we should probably start from the start.
Yeah, so I think that's...
Jumping into 4, this is...
roll that back
Star Wars all over again.
To 2001, the year of Kamiya, where he comes out with his masterpiece.
The best shit. The best shit.
So, DMC1, everyone knows, originally was Resident Evil 4, changed to DMC... much more action-oriented, as Kamiya likes to do. I didn't actually play DMC1. I think I was probably 15, 16.
Okay.
Picked it up from one of those bargain bins on PS2.
Course, probably Blockbuster.
No, it was EB Games.
Okay.
So, that was definitely young, because I think it was before
you worked at Blocky.
Yeah,
okay.
So...
Pre-Blockbuster Chris.
Exactly. It's a very, very early time. I just noticed we didn't even do our intros.
Oh, fuck.
I think we're past the point of that now.
No.
Everyone just accepts, these two idiots, they don't even have names anymore. They're just those guys who talk about random shit.
Those assholes who sit in an echoey room with a single mic.
Yeah, doesn't sound good. They got nothing to talk about.
Start drinking I've got no ice anymore. Fuck.
So basically, I'm Dante, and this is Nero, and we're here
go and get nicked, you prick.
Oh, what? You're not Virgil. Sorry.
No, I wasn't. No, okay, fine. I'll take it. Fucking...
Anyway.
Hey, I got robot hands and another second best waifu, so you can go away.
Whatever you say, Chief.
All I'm saying is, why the fuck was Kyrie not in fucking DMC5? I want...
You wanted that quality booty?
No, I just wanted to... everyone else got like their fucking moment, and I want... to be fair, she got her moment.
She got the phone call. We're going way too far ahead again.
And the sweet surrender, don't forget that.
Yeah, that's true. What more do you want, frankly?
Alright, rewind it back. 2001. DMC 1, Resi 4, originally, continue.
Yeah, so I think it was the first one to really stray into that stylish action territory where...
arguably invented the genre.
I think
the subgenre.
I think it really probably did, because it there wasn't really anything like it at the time, and there still wasn't... There was a lot of clones after it came out, but none of them really copied...
Well, you've mentioned that the closest thing that came to it was like Onimusha, or that was the inspiration.
Yeah, well technically Onimusha came first, but as some people know, DMC 1... was sort of formed from the glitch in Onimusha where you could juggle enemies with your weapons. So that kind of formed some of the ideas for DMC1. They sort of thought, let's integrate that into an actual combat system and make it cool. And I appreciate the fact that they decided to go with like a modern setting rather than like a medieval kind of setting, because it stands out. Like, that's the thing everyone sort of knows about DMC is like, oh, it's got like demons and monsters and stuff, but it's also in like modern times with cool guys with guns and big swords.
Red coats, all sorts of shit.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, well,
I don't have much to admittedly comment on the Onimusha games. If we quickly track to those, I know we played a little bit of each one, or at least 1, 3, and 4.
yeah.
And I was sort of mildly interested in 1, but I sort of got less interested as time as went on when we played the rest of them. Because you got me thinking that they're straight up DMC, lad. It's interesting because Onimusha is something which spawned DMC, which is this super fast like reflex, doing all sorts of crazy combos and shenanigans. Like was spawned from something which is essentially Resident Evil with a sword.
Yeah, it's interesting that Onimusha games, if anyone hasn't played them, they're actually a lot more similar to Resident Evil than something like DMC.
Or at least the first one that we played.
I mean, each one gets consecutively faster and more sort of crazy, but they're all pretty slow-paced and kind of methodical compared to DMC, which is sort of a bit more, use your reflexes, use your skills set, bring out the skill set and just sort of show off.
From the bit now, I've only played like literally an hour of each, so obviously, a lot could change, 20 hours into the third one. Oh, not the third one, sorry, excuse me, the fourth one.
Third or fourth, yeah.
But like that felt a lot more rigid to me, which makes sense,
Well, yeah, I mean there were years previously, but I think it's impressive that DMC 1 for the first one got so much right that later sequels and even all the copycats, which had it right in front of them, they still couldn't really match that level. Yeah. I'm not really sure how they couldn't quite copy the scheme. It wasn't that complex.
Well, that's the thing about DMC, and it's sort of like now I'm fairly new to the sort of action genre, but if, I like to be a little bit more specific. So sort of like character action or spectacle fighter. I like those terms. I'm newer to the genre. I know a lot of the games that are in the genre, but I've played relatively few of them. But this is the interesting thing about DMC from my experience playing it is like, you look at the stuff that's happening on screen and it looks really complicated. It's just triangle and like a directional button.
Yeah, well, I mean, before you even started playing any of the DMC games, I know you'd seen probably me playing a bit of them beforehand, but when you hadn't played any of them, you're just like looking in from the outside, what was your initial impression of just what they seemed like? And
this looks completely out of the realm of my ability. Okay. Well, because my first experience with DMC was actually DMC 4. I was at my grandmother's house as I was probably about 12 or so, and a friend of mine came over and he brought his Xbox and he booted up DMC 4 and started playing it. And I had no idea what it was. I remember looking at it and I was like, oh, there's lizard things and that's cool. Fast forward like 10 years. Or whatever, and I looked at footage of it and I'm like, holy smokes, how the fuck does anyone understand what's happening on a screen at once? And then I started playing it. Well, we'll get to that when we sort of dive more deeply into sort of the process for how we played them, but it was a bit of a learning curve, I will say that initially, but after a while settled in and it became quite natural and intuitive.
Yeah, well, that's what I find interesting compared to something like Bayonetta is probably the closest example, which has to use sort of multiple button inputs. Use circle, triangle, and square in sort of different kind of inputs to get that. Like Metal Gear Rising is the same thing where it's always like a heavy and light attack.
Yeah.
Whereas DMC,
and the mixing and matching.
Yeah. So it's dial combos.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas DMC has always only ever used just the triangle button for the melee attack. Which is modified by the analog stick.
Exactly.
And that creates surprising amount of depth, I think, when you compare it to, like, when you add on stuff like the lock-on, directional inputs, and different weapons,
obviously,
of course.
DT, weapon switching,
as the games went on, they added, the circle button for the styles, DT specific moves, that sort of thing, and of course you could buy new moves. So that adds a lot to the complexity, despite initially seeming, when you first start DMC 1, you've got like 2 combos, that. You've got like the fast stab.
And I will say, we'll segue now into DMC 1. So we actually didn't play this one together. I played this one by myself.
No, that's not quite true, because we did play a little bit together.
That is fair, actually.
We played the first couple of levels, and then we got to Phantom, the first boss.
The fucking choke point for anyone who doesn't know what they're doing.
Which, I mean, when I was younger, when I played it for the first time, I had the same issue. I think everyone who starts there always has an issue where they're like, this game's not so hard, and they get to that and like, oh, this boss is just impossible.
Well, so I have a theory surrounding this. So what we actually did when we played them, we actually did DMC 3 first. The later one, we tried DMC 1, and I sort of was ready to throw in the towel, thinking that it wasn't my thing. And you suggested that we switch it up and go to DMC 3. And then sort of through that process of learning through the early levels of that game, managed to go back by myself and actually beat DMC 1 without any help whatsoever. And my theory surrounding this, and you guys may have a different opinion, but I feel like the one big flaw that DMC 1 has, and probably my biggest flaw with it, and it's not really a problem with the game overall, because once you get reasonably okay with how everything works, it's not an issue, but especially for someone who's trying to get into it for the first time, learning like the opening levels, I think, how many are there until you get to Phantom? Like 4? I think Phantom's like the 3rd or 4th level.
Yeah, I think it's 3rd.
Yeah. The enemies that they throw at you are fairly non-threatening. Like, you may get hit once or twice and they can like group around you, but in terms of like requiring you to sort of be overly evasive and defensive, which is the interesting difference between DMC 1 and then like DMC 3 through to 5, is like, in that game it is completely valid and like required in a lot of situations to sort of be a lot more evasive and using range, for example. Through my hearings of DMC, it was like you need to be as stylish as possible. Like, that's the whole point, is to go in, attack wildly, be offensive. So I'm playing DMC 1, and of course my thought goes to like the Griffin boss fight, where like the way to beat that, really, like, I know you can strike it, but the most efficient way to do it is just to devil trigger
and use guns.
Yeah. So you get to Phantom after these first couple of levels of like fairly weak, non-threatening enemies where you are allowed to just style on them. You get to Phantom, and you have very little experience maneuvering yourself in the environment, landing, because obviously probably DMC's biggest weakness overall mechanically is like the platforming sort of stuff.
Yeah,
like
DMC 1 in particular, with the fixed camera angles.
Yeah.
It definitely hurts the game
really
when you get to the point of being really precise.
Yeah.
I think it's quite unfriendly to new players who... Phantom boss especially, I think, gives you no time to react. It's just like immediately into the boss.
He deals a ton of damage, is not necessarily fast, but has a large enough move pool to make it especially hard for someone who's facing for the first time to memorize.
Yeah, there's not a lot of wind up to a lot of his moves, and you're in that sort of cramped space in the hall with the pillars and stuff, which you can use to sort of avoid his attacks, but also can help hinder you as well.
Exactly, and one of the bigger things as well that I found particularly challenging with him is that his weak points, whilst later on in the game when you face him again, obviously you're much more you're well versed with what you're doing, and those opportunities and weaknesses present themselves more easily. But like initially, I think the area that most players are going to realize that they can attack is like the sort of the back and then the tail. So a very limited selection of like weak areas to try and attack him. So I found myself like dying a lot, failing to jump onto his back and then attacking at his legs, and of course, triggering that sort of semi-stun animation where I've hit, the armor and have to
glanced
wait.
off. Yeah,
exactly. So that's probably my biggest issue with it overall. It's just that little sort of like, if to compare and contrast to DMC 3, you get the intro sort of level, which is just the bar fight, where you get to become sort of accompany yourself with the controls and learn how the combos and styles and whatnot work. Then you get the second level, which is like a boss, which requires a little bit more movement from you. Like the base enemies are a little bit more active. So you get the like the Reapers. You get the sort of the red Reapers. I don't know.
That sort of do the dash around.
Exactly. They require you to sort of maneuver yourself a little bit more. And then you get the obviously the bomb guys who carry like the explosive, which require you to be sort of more environmentally aware. And then finally you get the sort of mini boss, or it's the first boss, but as a regular enemy later in the game. It's sort of the larger Reaper, who does a number of like sort of unavoidable, unblockable attacks that you have to purposely maneuver out of the way. So you're automatically being taught a lot more about how to dodge and maneuver, and that maybe being overly aggressive isn't necessarily the solution to the problem. Then you get what was it? I think another level before you get to Cerberus, which, funnily enough, I found much easier than Phantom. just if not, because of, playing through the first levels a couple of times, becoming more familiar with, maneuvering around, I found him much more forgiving because of that lead up and sort of gradual sort of progression in learning how everything works compared to 1 where you're sort of easy Phantom.
Yeah, well, for a lot of people, like if DMC 3 is your first game, I think Cerberus is a big roadblock because he's definitely a spike from just the random enemies. The Reapers are very easy to take out.
Yeah.
And the boss, besides dodging him, which is not that hard, he's pretty simple to take out once you know his patterns. Whereas Cerberus, I think, is the first boss that can do some serious damage and actually takes a lot of, you have to actually get rid of his ice shield and whittle down the heads and that sort of thing. So it sets you up for what's overall a much harder game than DMC 1.
Oh, 100%.
Whereas I think Phantom is probably a bigger hurdle, and then from that point you kind of coast for a bit. Like the second boss, Nello Angelo, I
thought all the Nello Angelo fights in 1 were pretty easy.
Yeah, besides maybe the last one,
the last one was challenging, but admittedly that was because I hadn't realized at that point that the alien devil arm, which consumes devil trigger to fire.
Yeah.
Because of course in DMC 1 and all the DMCs you sort of rely on your devil trigger to sort of heal you, especially in those boss fights where you're going to get hit a bit.
Yeah.
I was always constantly running out of devil trigger and dying subsequently, or consequently, sorry. And then when I realized that, much more manageable.
Yeah. I think the only boss that really is a big challenge in 1 is Nightmare.
Yes.
And even then, only probably Nightmare 3 is the one that you go, this is actually pretty hard.
Nightmare 3, I remember all the Nightmare, or especially the first and the last one gave me trouble. The first to learn him, and then the last because he got, that extra stupid fucking phase where he starts fucking throwing everything at you.
And then Trish has the lightning there as well.
That's right.
In as well.
Which actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It sort of was very surprisingly non-sporadic. It sort of happened only a couple of times and the fight was done. Sorry,
yeah. Well, I was going to say, from DMC 1, having a pretty basic combat system compared to the later games. There's only really 2 main weapons,
which I was surprised about.
Did you think there was going to be, 5 or something?
Well, at this
a lot more?
point, playing DMC 1, we were, I think, up to the Virgil boss fight in DMC 3.
The first one?
No, the last boss fight.
So you played them consecutively? I thought you beat 1 first.
No. I think I beat 1 just as we were finishing 3.
Oh, okay.
Because I knew we were going to have to go back to 1, and then one afternoon I was bored and decided to play it and then beat it in a weekend.
Right.
But so I beat it just as we were up to Virgil. So at that point, we had Beowulf and Nevin and Agni and Rudra and all of those weapons. So I probably did expect there to be more weapons. It's not like DMC 1 does have a couple more weapons than just 2. The problem is that 2 of those are just basic sword variants or whatever.
Well, yeah, no one uses Force Edge and no one uses Sparta, except maybe in the last fight.
Sparta's cool because it has slightly more range than than Alistair.
Yeah.
But the problem is, of course, you don't get any of Alistair's,
and it doesn't have Devil Trigger as well until the end
exactly.
of the game. So yeah, unfortunately, it sort of, despite having technically more weapons, a lot of it's sort of not apparent.
Yeah, it's Ifrit and Alistair.
Yeah.
Ifrit, is that correct?
Yeah.
It's been a while.
In 1, yeah.
But yeah, can I just say, for having so few weapons, really, for having 2, never once got bored with them. I actually found myself loving Ifrit personally, mostly because I really enjoyed the sort of you going from Alistair's sort of quick showy, try and get in as many hits as you can, doing all of these combos to sort of just pause stuff and powering it up, sort of sporadically and going in for those big hits, and then loved the roundhouse kick as well, which stunned everything around me.
I think the fist weapons in general are really overpowered, and some of the better weapons in all the games. Beowulf in 3 I think is one of the best weapons in the game by far.
Yeah. Well, it's what won me the Virgil fight.
Yeah, exactly. I think on my later hard playthroughs, that's definitely the way you sort of, easy way to beat Virgil, or easier way.
It seems to cut through his defenses, which makes sense because it'd be a higher damage dealer. And
definitely
get over that threshold. But
so in terms of the story of DMC 1, it's pretty basic in terms of.
I'd say basic but effective.
I really enjoyed it. A lot of people I think sort of really are not sure about Dante's character from 3 onwards, because in 1 he sort of has a bit more of a goal. You know, it's a typical revenge story where he's to go, you know, avenge his mother and find out what happened to his brother and that sort of thing. And you know, it's got that simple gravitas that you're like, okay, you know his goals, you know what he wants. He's sort of serious but also jokey. He's got that likable style. I think you know that's why Dante stood out, is that he's goofy and he sort of plays around with the bosses and you know with the weapons and everything, but he's also serious enough that you know he can still in
those scenes where he needs to sell it.
Yeah,
he can sell it.
I mean, it has that campy,
of course, but that's half the fun.
Japanese, American style.
I don't think the story would be anywhere near as good if it didn't have that.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
If this story took itself as seriously as something else, something Western made, for example, I don't think it would work.
No,
I think that level of camp, especially in the later games, because they obviously went with that. DMC 3 Dante is much different to DMC 1 Dante. But I find them so much more endearing and enjoyable because of that nonsense.
I mean, I think that's one of the big draws for wacky Dante going on weird adventures and so on. I think that's half the appeal, just seeing what weird shit he'll do next, rather than him being so self-serious, which
exactly
he becomes in DMC 2.
Which we don't talk about.
No,
which I can't talk about because I've not played.
Well, we played the first mission, which I think should give you enough of a guide to sort of go, this is not worth playing.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, and it's not even the worst part of the game by far. Like that alone, I think is like an okay part of the game.
See, that was what I was astonished by when we started it. I was like, initially, I was like, hey, we'll come back to this. I'll complete this sort of thought, and then we'll come back because we're not done DMC 1, guys. Get ready for another 2-hour podcast, guys. But the first enemy we saw with the skeletons in the sort of cages or whatever, and that's a neat idea. I don't mind the look of that. The later enemies in the level, not so much. Especially the Devil Trigger design, also like minigun Dante or whatever.
Yeah, with the handguns.
You had the wall run. I don't even mind the dedicated dodge button. Like, it's not horrible. I'm not sad that it's gone in later games, but
it's interesting because it kind of became like Trickster as a style.
Yeah, exactly. So like initial impressions were okay, but then you tap the triangle button and you're like, oh no.
Well, that's the weird thing. Like I always say every time I bring up DMC 2, is that they could have literally just imported Dante from the first game like that. It was obviously all there still. Just copied that over and just thrown in some new areas and enemies. Like the gameplay style worked fine, but they decided to just remake it.
No idea why. Genuinely no idea.
And it just obviously, he just has like a big club essentially, and he gets more swords, but they'll work exactly the same.
And the level ups are just powers.
Yeah, removes any kind of moves in the game that you earn. It's just makes swords stronger.
Really, really dull. I was disinterested after about 40 minutes. Only interested because. I'm just fucking paradoxically disinterested and then interested. The only reason I was sort of morbidly interested was because Dante and I had so much fun with the first, 1 and 3.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can only imagine that, 2 hours in, I'd be ready to put it down.
I mean, you're lucky you didn't get to the point of the infected chopper, because that's the highlight.
No, man, I want the tank.
Oh yeah, the tank's better because you fight 2 of them.
Oh fuck! Yeah. What about the wolves?
Oh yeah, the wolves. Was it Gippy and Ippy or something? They're supposed to not be with themselves. They're supposed to be with a boss.
Oh, okay.
But then there's one area where you fight them by themselves, and you can just stand still, and they'll just jump around you and never hit you.
Oh yeah, I've seen that footage.
Yeah. I don't know why they did that. I think it's run out of
intimidate Dante.
Oh yeah.
To let him know.
That makes sense.
They don't give a fuck.
All right, well, we'll bring it back to DMC 1.
DMC 1. So, the fact that there were 2 weapons and, 4 or 5 devil arms didn't hurt my experience at all. I think the game has aged remarkably well. We've played a couple of games together, which I thought that I would, enjoy much less than I did. Most notably, I think MGS1 recently.
Yep.
Looking at footage for that and getting off topic again, but that is a game for, what was it, 1999?
98,
was 98. I expected that to be clunky and, just a pain to play, and I was only there for the plot. And to be fair, I was there for the plot, but there were only 2 sections in that game, and we'll go into this in the inevitable MGS podcast, but the point that I'm making is like aged really fucking well, and then this is like even better. Like I could play this whenever, easy peasy. Like I don't care about the fixed camera, like the sort of like the curated scenes that you come in on. I didn't feel at any point during the game that it was hindered, being, like the two, like you play those games where it's like, oh, it came out in 2001, I hope you look forward to a frame rate that's like sub fucking 30.
Yeah,
and
that's why it doesn't run well, or, there's all these improved techniques that later games did because this game's just so basic.
Yeah. If anything, the only unfortunate thing about the experience is that the port, the 360 and PS3 port, and then obviously the PS4 and Xbox port, is not great.
It's not amazing. It does, the basic job of like upping the resolution and everything, but it's not as perfect a port as it really could be.
Which is ironic. The fact that a later re-release made with better technology is the thing that ages it more than the game itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I always think back to it because it's interesting that I think later games like DMC 3 most notably, and even 2 you could say, the environments look a lot more basic, a lot less detail, and I realize that's because you're going through it a lot slower in DMC 1, but I have to wonder how much of it is a holdover from the Resident Evil origins of it. Because
the whole cathedral sort of semi-gothic thing seems very Resident Evil, like the sort of abandoned castle, derelict area. Seems very.
It's a sort of a shame, I think, that the later games didn't go back to more environments like that.
I think that's like for you and me, like our biggest criticism of 5. Yeah, and spoiler alert, 5 is fucking amazing. But just some more environmental diversity. Like, we would have loved to see more of DMC 1's sort of more gothic architecture.
Yeah, I think that would be a good addition to any of the DMC games. I mean, probably 4 had the most of that, with a couple of castles.
Yeah, the problem is 4 you get sick of because you play it twice.
you play it, all the way through a couple of times. But yeah, I think it's certainly added to a kind of atmosphere that the later games didn't have.
Yes.
Like DMC 3 onwards is so upbeat and ridiculously wacky.
Well, you can tell that DMC 1 was a horror game before it was DMC. Like, it is, the game that has the most atmosphere, I would say. Like, atmosphere is obviously very subjective, and then atmosphere also, doesn't necessarily just mean horror. You could argue that DMC 5 or DMC 3 has just as good an atmosphere, but I would say, as far as like a horror feeling, as far as something that feels like, it could make you, uncomfortable, I would say DMC 1 comes the closest to that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you get to the end parts where, you go into hell and you've got all those sort of weird environments. And
then Mundus at the end with, like, the magma hands.
Yeah, all the millions of hands coming out of him in the eyeballs and stuff. And I think it creates an interesting kind of tone where it sort of takes itself seriously, but also not too seriously at the same time. It's this weird middle ground.
I think it rides the line really well.
Yeah. You can take it seriously. You don't just disbelieve everything, but you also, never get too deep in where you go, oh, this is a horror game, I can't go forward anymore, because you're not Chris Redfield who's got 6 bullets left. You're Dante who's got a big sword and 1,000,000 bullets.
A big sword, and who's willing to tell the main enemy of the game to go fuck himself, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think that's the difference. I think between something like Resident Evil and DMC is that. The enemies and the threat is the same, but it's the character you're playing as
and your ability to deal with the problem.
Yeah,
exactly. I suppose we should go on to plot. Obviously, we mentioned it's very basic and it's serviceable. I really enjoy its camp nature. It's interesting though because as far as the plot, by DMC 3 I was hooked. Like I was so invested in these people, which again is a fucking achievement for something where. It's a half demon brother versus a half demon brother, and all of that shenanigan, cheesy one-liners and over the top action scenes, and I am invested in them.
Yeah,
I would say DMC 1 is probably the weakest out of all of the games. Just not including 2 because we're not talking about 2, but it doesn't change the outcome. Still very good and serviceable, and a great introduction to the character.
Well, that's the thing. I think you can't have the sequels without 1. Like,
no, exactly.
The one, while it doesn't have like the deepest plot or the plot that really changes a huge amount in the series, it has the context that sets up the rest of the series. Like, without it, you can't have the context of what Dante does or where he's at or what he's done in the past.
Exactly. And that's one thing I love about this series as well, and I was talking to you about it earlier, how it embraces itself. Like, you get those franchises and things that come out, today where it seems like they constantly want to forget that something came out prior to it and it wants to reinvent itself, change itself. This is no longer canon, this is that. It's saying something when in DMC5, they reference DMC2. They're not, non-canonizing it. It's, moved around in, sort of order.
The chronology,
The chronology has changed, but, an enemy pops up, it's referenced characters, appear in external media and whatnot, and I really like that. I think it shows a tremendous amount of respect to the IP.
Yeah, I mean that's the best part about DMC, and I think a lot of those franchises are very similar in that they're not ashamed even of their mistakes. They like to get to this point in DMC 5 of we've come this far to become this big, huge, popular game. Those missteps along the way have helped it there. It's not something to be ashamed of and forget. It's something they've actually learned from and improved by.
Exactly.
And that's what's gotten them to the point of being, the best action game.
I think it feels a lot more genuine.
Yeah.
Personally. Like, you play a lot of things nowadays and, like God of War is not a great example, like the most recent God of War, but like, and that game does, pay a lot of homage and respect to its previous, material and whatnot. But to me, that game felt very... we want to be The Last of Us now.
Oh yeah, no, I think actually the kind of the opposite. I mean, while it actually had a surprising amount of references to the previous games, which I didn't think they were going to put in, a lot of the time it feels like they're trying to go, oh no, well, the last games are kind of like, they're kind of shameless, they're kind of like sex and blood and killing, and this one's like, oh no, this story now is about like love and caring and growing wise.
I'm not going to say that they shouldn't do what they want to do. Like, that's fine. Like, they can... make Kratos like the mature father figure who's trying to, atone for his sins and, be that better person. But, a part of me looks at, like the past 4, like mainline games, excluding like PSP spin-offs and whatnot. And it's like, it feels a little disingenuous to go from this, over the top, God killing, like, testosterone, sort of fuel game to this, equally testosterone-fueled game in parts, but then also this trying to be a very adult and mature thing.
I think it's wishy-washy with what it wants to achieve.
Yeah.
It's never set fully in place, this is what we want, this is how we want to go about it. It's like, let's have a mature, serious story with like this realistic, emotional core.
Yeah.
Oh, but then let's take an hour out of the time to like stab a dragon in the middle of a mountain while like fighting on a mountain, crashing down, or like fighting this guy and throwing him up into the air like it's some big Marvel movie or something. It's this weird dichotomy which doesn't quite fit. Whereas in DMC, I think all the parts fit together.
Everything. It's never trying to be anything different than what it is, and constantly makes itself better, or at least learns from what has been done prior and attempts to, heighten it to a sense. And we'll obviously get into that later. I think another good example of a franchise, misunderstanding what it is, or perhaps refusing to try and learn from, things that have been established in previous titles is like the Halo franchise, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Like, talk about a series going from, we have a moot character so people can insert themselves, to this fucking ridiculous, over-the-top, milked, we need to make sure that Master Chief is a real person. And I know it's not like the most important thing in the entire, like, the shooting and whatnot is the core, but you go from something which is hearty in the way that it's so simple, and then you go to something which is trying so fucking hard to be like, Star Trek or something, and you're like, just calm down.
For me, something like Halo was always kind of a sci-fi pastiche. Like, it wasn't meant to be taken too seriously. It was like this ridiculous story where it's like, oh, this green man super soldier is taking down these like goofy alien weirdos, like combined with a bit of like horror and action as well. It was like literally something like Aliens, where you just, it's like schlock sci-fi.
You're not meant to take it seriously. And, Halo was great because, it was very simple and direct with what it wanted to do. It had elements which were interesting. Like, I liked learning about the various factions in the game, and people obviously put attention and care into those details, but they didn't feel it necessary to constantly want to shove them in your face.
Yeah,
which is really
it's always
nice.
like, oh yeah, here's this new deep story for Halo we've got. Read our 16 novels to get the backstory
Exactly.
on why Master Chief is the way he is today, or whatever
it's like,
else.
just play the fucking game, dude. And,
Yeah.
you know, shoot shit and enjoy it, and that's fun.
Whereas I think while DMC does have some of those peripherals, everything in the game is cohesive. There's nothing
Exactly.
like outside of it where it's like, well, what's going on here?
I don't
Who's this character
I don't think
coming
that
along?
there's ever been a thing in DMC from memory that doesn't feel like it fits, unless you want to talk about 2 and DMC.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are an example. So is there anything else we want to discuss with DMC 1?
No, I think pretty much done. I would recommend it to most anyone, especially those who are fans of, you know...
Yeah, I think it's a good gateway. You know, a lot of people say maybe 3 is a better way to start.
Look, I would say, you know, play 3 if you're struggling with 1. Like, if you know, if you're having trouble with Phantom specifically, you know, you can't, you know, land the attacks you're trying to do or whatever, play 3 and, you know, learn, you know, how that works. Because, you know, despite, you know, 3 still having the fixed camera, but, you know, you can still, you know, you can move it a little bit in select areas, and, you know, obviously the focus is a little bit different than 1, you know, sort of you have more options in combat, and, you know, the style system is a little more openly encouraged than in 1. Obviously 3 has the benefit of being a prequel as well, so you're not going to miss out on any context, really. But yeah, play 3 in that case. But, you know, I would encourage people to start with 1, you know, play through it in release order.
I think that's the interesting thing, is that DMC has this weird learning curve where you start and you're not really sure what's going on and how to do things correctly, and then at some point it sort of clicks over where you start to understand, you know, this is the best way to play it, this is the efficient way to do it, and that transfers over to DMC 1 if you go back to it, where it just sort of clicks in place, and then once you get over the Phantom hurdle, you go straight through, and you have no troubles really with the rest of the game.
Exactly.
Like, it'll be challenging, but you never sit at the point where you're like, this doesn't even make any sense to me anymore. It's totally confusing.
Yeah, I agree, 150%. And, you know, DMC is that thing, like, speaking of, like all skills that you learn in each game carry over to the next. You know what I mean? Like,
it's never like the big gameplay change.
Exactly. You are never, you know, like, it's not like you go and play DMC4 and you're like, oh, fuck, I'm shit at this again. You know, if you know what you're doing, you're pretty comfortable, and then it's that ability to learn new things on top of what you've already
Exactly, which is why they have the later characters, or the styles, you know, that sort of thing. There's those small incremental changes which eventually keep adding on to more and more in later games.
Yeah.
Like the style switching from 3 to 4.
Speaking of 3, segue into 3. Sorry, I probably cut you off there mid-sentence.
No, that's
I apologize.
fine. That's fine. We got to get into 3.
Dare I say, Kino.
I don't even know if that got picked
It looks like Kino is back on the menu, boys.
And it'll stay on the menu.
Gee. Well, I mean, this whole video really was prompted by the announcement of DMC5 Special Edition.
Holy smokes, I've never come so hard in my life.
So, you know, that really has brought us into DMC3, starring our boy himself.
Of course.
The main man, Mr. V,
Yeah,
Virgil.
Mr. Virgil, otherwise known as... What is it, the fucking poetry that he quotes? I don't know, guys. I'm pulling this out of my arsehole. I don't realise what I'm saying. Yes, Virgil. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's clear from the start of DMC3, when you start it up, you're like, okay, there's going to be another... Like, well, I played a bit of DMC2. That was shit. So is this going to be edgy, boring Dante again? He's going to flip a coin like Two-Face?
Oh my gosh.
And then the demons bust in, and he starts the jukebox.
Let's rock.
And you're like, oh. And then that cutscene plays. And I mean, DMC1 had a few weird, like crazy, wacky cutscenes where...
Nothing like this.
Yeah, this is like, here we go.
This entire game, and even more so than 5 later on, and, you know, and 4 for that matter, because 4 had a couple. But like just insanity. The entire game is insanity.
Yeah.
And I fucking love it. It is so good. Yeah. Like, it's telling that you watch, like, a cutscene from 2005... DMC3, and it's better than like half of the action you see nowadays in cinema, and you're like, geez, like 5 minutes of pure bliss. That entire thing, fantastic.
Yeah, the choreographing, I think, was probably the biggest highlight, I think, in the changeover. And that feeds into the story as well, where I think they've just made the characters a lot more I don't want to be cliche, but alive. Every character on screen,
emotive.
Yeah, they sort of pop off the screen. There's never a point like in DMC 1 where you're sort of like, oh, like Trish is a bit awkward, like Dante's a bit.
Well, it's interesting because DMC 3, despite not knowing it at the time, marked the point where Dante was now like this guy. This guy plays Dante,
which is interesting because people go, they play 3 and then they play 1, and they're like, why is Dante not wacky woohoo pizza man in this game? Why is he like so grim and serious? And I mean, you can argue away anything you want and say, oh, he's sad because he thinks Virgil's dead. He's sad because he's on a mission to kill his mother's killer or whatever. But it's really just they decided that young Dante would be more fun to do in this game, and then people liked him, and then they decided that's Dante now. And I mean, I don't fault them for that. I think he probably could have been a bit more serious sometimes, but it sort of fits with the games he's in.
But I mean, to be fair, like not necessarily like I'm not going to criticize. Like you could argue away any number of reasons for Dante being less serious. Like he has his moments in 3, but to be fair, he's like what 17 or whatever in that game.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. The whole point is that he's like sort of learning to take responsibility for his life and become the future devil hunter that he is. But like if we're talking about his character as an arc, I would say like he's pretty serious in 5.
Yeah, well,
like,
I think 4 is probably the biggest offender, where he goes from being this 17-year-old kid who's crazy to being whatever age, 40 or whatever in DMC 4, where he's just like still acting like he's 17. And I mean, 4 is a bit of a unique case because I think it actually explains itself away where Dante is so overpowered in that game. He's just like he's on holiday.
He's on holiday. Yeah, exactly.
So it's okay for him to be a bit nonchalant the whole game, and
it's sort of a nice dynamic because you go from like Nero, who's obviously trying so hard the entire game to achieve his goal, and then you get to play as Dante in the second half where he's like, I'm going to cut that fucking dice game in half.
Yeah,
I do not adhere to this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay. I mean, it speaks to it that they've written him well enough where it gets to the point where you're not annoyed that Dante's not taking anything seriously. You really just want Nero to go away and you want to hang out with Dante instead.
Oh, exactly. To be fair to Nero, though, it's probably because Dante at this point has had 4 games technically, so it makes sense that you'd want to play with him for a bit. Hey, I like Nero. Leave Nero.
Yeah, I think Nero definitely improves over the course of 4 and into 5.
Yes, 100%.
From the start,
and obviously I don't begrudge anyone for disliking him. when the whole bait and switch MGS2 thing happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, not quite that much, but I think people knew from the start that he was going to be a new, good playable character in it. But less than that, I think people were he just wasn't Dante. That was the problem.
Which is fair.
Which is the same thing happened with the reboot, I suppose.
Yeah.
Where despite being called Dante, he still wasn't Dante.
Dante.
Where people had no issue with DMC3 when they could play as Virgil, of course. Why would you?
Yeah. Well, because Virgil's a fucking legend, mate.
Yeah, and I think the main...
I want to use Judgment Cut End until fucking nothing moves in the room, and then I want to do it again just to be sure.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the big draw of DMC3, I think that... I mean, why it's memorable, and I think out of the whole series, it probably has the best story without
I would agree.
Without much of an argument.
You want to do story first?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to start. So, I mean, the whole goal of the story is Dante's brother, Virgil, who did appear in DMC1, which is not really ever clearly explained.
No, it's sort of like 3 sort of, definitely builds upon that a lot more because it's sort of inferred throughout the game and then you sort of realise towards the end, but it's sort of... It doesn't play a big part in the story.
No.
Like, it obviously motivates Dante to dislike the main villain even more, but it's never really sort of like directly spoken or acknowledged, from what I remember. And then obviously 3, sort of retcons and makes that much bigger deal.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point is that Virgil, who's Dante's twin brother, wants to go and basically get...
Slightly older twin brother.
Slightly older by 1 minute or whatever, I guess.
Whatever it was, yeah.
But yeah, he wants to get power from the demon world by opening the portal between the demon and human world. And then...
With his mate.
Arkham.
Asylum.
Arkham, yes. And then Arkham's daughter, Lady...
Best girl.
Comes along for the ride as well, and she's sort of an antagonist side protagonists.
Sort of unsure, you're not quite sure, and then by the end of the game, you're like,
I mean, I think that's the interesting part that probably doesn't filter into the later games as well. I guess it's part DMC1 as well, where the cast is so sort of small and integrated that it works surprisingly well. You've only got like 4 or 5 characters.
You've
really.
got like, what is it? Dante, Lady, Virgil, and then Arkham.
Yeah.
And I suppose the Jester.
Like, that's sort of, it's still Arkham really. So I mean, you can count that, and you can count like the tiny side characters, like some of the demons or something, if you really want
bosses,
to.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, those are the major players, and I think that small cast who are all, they all have the motivations. I mean, that's the thing. In like DMC4, people complain about Dante where he doesn't really have a solid motivation. He's just there to figure out what's going on.
Exactly.
Whereas in 3, it's like, you know what every character wants, you know what they want to do to get it.
And the smaller cast as well, I think, like, it gives a game, especially one as fast paced as, something like Devil May Cry, where cutscenes and whatnot are awesome, but realistically you want to be playing the game. Like, it allows them to focus in the little time that they had to make something cohesive and coherent.
Yeah.
It gives everyone ample time to be developed in the game and make it, make you care that much about everyone else.
Which I think is something that, is left out of something like 4 and 5, where you got characters like Lady and Trish that show up, but their arc's already over.
Exactly.
So they just kind of have to be there.
And I think you and I, well, you especially mentioned this, and I can't really disagree, that 5 would probably be a little more coherent if they weren't there. If not just for the criticism being, what were they doing?
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with them being there, but I just would like them to do something rather than be sort of batteries for bosses, really.
Exactly. I mean, narratively it makes sense, but, perhaps, they could have buggered off and done something else.
Yeah, there could have been a little bit more thought in their role there, rather than just them show up and...
Exactly. But yeah, DMC3's story, for, once again, reasonably simplistic. I'd say more complicated than the first game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But, jeez, by the end of that game, if you ain't cheering, I don't know what you're doing. Like, for such a simple premise, relative to the first game and whatnot, obviously, it's a little more complicated, but for something that overall is very simple, and with such a small cast of characters, like by the end, it does a remarkably decent job of really making you feel like it's not Shakespeare, but it's pretty bloody good, really.
Yeah, I think people talk about rivalries in gaming, but the Dante Virgil dynamic, I think, is surprisingly engaging.
Played really well by the actors as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Despite Cheese is a part of it, and that's awesome. But what's his name? Virgil Dan
Southworth.
Fantastic. And you mentioned he had a cold.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the story that I've heard, is that he had a cold during it, so that's why his voice is kind of a bit nasally throughout. I'm not sure if that's just bullshit that I heard online, but I think the fact that, despite the fact that he only appears, in short bursts here and there, you get a really great sense of his character and how he opposes Dante.
And not to mention the fact that it's not just portrayed, through what he says. Like, you have multiple like the Beowulf fight. I personally found that to be like one of the harder fights of the game, because I wasn't particularly great at sort of like vertical dodging. To be fair, I wasn't using Trickster at all. I was doing basically a Swordmaster playthrough. So I found avoiding some of his attacks, especially those bullshit like ranged like angelic attacks or whatever, really hard. And then like you struggle through and you beat him, and then Virgil like one-shots him later on, and with the first boss as well. Really great to show just how much of like an opposing force your twin is.
Well, I think it's also clarified through actual gameplay as well when you fight him, because you have the progressive fights sort of at the big changing points in the story.
The three
so
acts,
sort of in like, I think it's mission 5 or 6 where you fight him for the first time.
About 5 or 6, maybe 7.
Yeah, and then you're completely outmatched really, even though the fight's not hard. But in terms of story, he takes you down.
I would say that it's probably the weakest fight, of his, which makes sense because it's the first. But like, it's like one of the one of those fights where, and a lot of games do this, and it's sort of less of a criticism, more of a it'd be cool if they could figure out a way to get around it, where like you win the fight but you lose the cutscene, sort of a thing.
Well, that's the problem in a lot of games.
In a lot of games. So, but I mean, it's not just specific to this one.
I think they make out for it with the later fights, which is Virgil going at full strength.
Well, exactly. And that's what's so cool about those later fights, is obviously the middle one is in universe sort of a draw. Like you sort of both sort of come off, and what ends up, you get betrayed by Arkham, and then the whole tower sort of gets...
Yeah, so there's a bit of a break there after that point.
And then obviously the last fight, like, dare I say, best boss fight of all time.
Well, I think it's pretty high up there. I don't know there'd be too many that really beat that.
Like, in both, thematical presentation and then, like, fucking balls to... Like, that fight is hard.
Yeah.
Like, just to clarify, I played all of these in the recent playthrough on normal difficulty, which makes sense because it's my first time playing them. And that fight took me 20 plus tries to get.
It definitely pushes you to get better every time you fight Virgil, because he probably would be one of the more challenging bosses in the game, purely for just being able to regen health and go Devil Trigger and stuff.
Yeah, and having to learn, because all of the other enemies, despite being, some being quite fast and being able to, all of them being able to deal quite heavy damage, having him have a phase where you are better off just leaving him alone. And then, of course, having that sort of, like, trade-off whereby, I kind of have to hit him, though, because he's regenning health. I found that really difficult. And, until I found Beowulf to sort of help punch through his higher defense, obviously, in Devil Trigger.
Yeah.
Really, really quite challenging.
Yeah. But, yeah, I think in total the game... a lot of people would debate whether or not it or 5 is the peak of the series so far.
Can't even go there yet, man. We're only fucking 15 minutes in.
I haven't played the Switch re-release.
That we should preface that, yeah.
Which I think would add something with the style switching, weapon switching.
100%.
Which is something that I do appreciate they added. Because I think that's probably the biggest weakness of the game, which isn't not its fault at all, because it's just only because retroactively the other games have added that stuff
exactly.
in.
Again.
But I think the great improvements in this game was the style system.
Yes.
Which allows you to switch between, in the end it's 6, but
that's right.
It's
four main styles and then 2 you unlocked.
Yeah.
So just quickly before we do styles, any more thoughts? I know we haven't really gone too much into sort of spoilers, which is a first for us because the Silent Hill one basically removed any need to play
the whole thing, yeah.
Any more thoughts on the story? Mine are fairly vague, simple, effective, great cast, great voice acting.
Yeah, well, I think that's the best thing about DMC is that it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be any like big time traveling twist or something like that. It can just be happy to be, this guy is fucking shit up. You need to take him down.
I think it's telling as well, like when you think about like all that, the universe has open to it. You're literally a demon hunter. You could do a lot of different things with that. And like, the fact that they chose to focus on a sibling rivalry, and it is as fucking like insane and captivating as it is. I think speaks a lot to the quality of what's on screen.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing about Devil May Cry is that they don't do a thing that a lot of games do where it's like, the sequel's a year after the last game and they're just doing the same thing over and over again. The DMC games are all like, let's have just like a huge leap in time to like something completely different like continent going on. All this new shit's happening. Like years have passed, people have changed, but it just seems to flow naturally.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they really achieve that.
Especially 1, 3, and 5.
Yeah.
Like if you had to pick a core 3, I would pick those 3, obviously.
Yeah, and I think 4 is interesting as well because it has obviously the break between 3 and 4 is that one of the two characters has had a child that's grown up now. Yeah. Within that space of time, how long that's been, 20 years or something. So things have changed despite only being 3 years since the last game.
Yeah, exactly.
Technically, years and years have passed now, and things are pretty different from what you'd remember.
Yeah.
It sets it in a different light, and I think 3 does probably the best job in setting up kind of the stakes going forward. Like 1 was so isolated on its own island, you're never really sure what the rest of the world is like.
No, you see the direct impact of like your brother's actions on the world in this.
Yeah.
Like, straight away, like the end of level 2. You see, Timothy Grew coming up through the ground.
And the whole city being destroyed,
yeah,
exactly. That sort of thing.
It's like very, very early on established what's at stake here as opposed to an island.
Yeah, I mean, 1 had, Mundus is this big bad guy who's going to, vaporize the world or whatever. But 3 sort of made that a bit more active by going, here it is in the human world. And you sort of, when you go into hell at the end of the game, you're like, this is what could happen, is that shit could get this wild if it was let loose.
Exactly.
So that there's a lot at stake. Whereas 1, you're like, it's pretty isolated on the island. Yeah. So there's that divide there. But, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So, story's great. Play the game. Style system. I'm nailing it with the segues. Not really.
Sure.
Just so you know, guys, I'm not nailing it with the segues.
Hey. That was pretty stylish segue, though.
No, it's more like a C.
It's a C. It was
a C version.
Come on!
I'm gonna end this with like me screaming S into the microphone. So we'll give you a countdown warning on that
Jesus.
one. So the style system implemented in 3, what was it, 4, and then 2 that you can unlock throughout the game.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that fact that, you know, they didn't just go, oh yeah, you know, this is just like a new move you can do. It's like 4 different styles, which each have a really different utility, and they can all be leveled up and provide even more utility on top of that. Like, it's not just press circle to dodge. It's like you press circle to like shift in a direction that you choose, and then you level up. You can do it mid-air. You can like bounce off walls with it, that sort of thing.
And then eventually you can just teleport across the level.
Yeah, so they added a lot of utility. Again, like the same way, that to one button.
Exactly. And, you know, again, speaks to like despite the controls being so simple, you can get so much depth out of this game. You know, you go from the first game where you get, you know, like sort of, you know, button delays in the frequency in which you input triangle and sort of like the direction of your left thumbstick or whatever and being locked on. Actually, the first game didn't have... No, it did have lock on.
It did, yeah.
So, excuse me. See, that's how long ago I played it. But yeah, then you get to 3 and you get that plus circle. So, you know, that's why I think a lot of people would gravitate towards, you know, Swordmaster, because it gives you literally like double the moves.
I think for everyone's first playthrough, they normally use Swordmaster or maybe Trickster.
Yeah.
No one ever go into like Royal Guard.
No, Royal Guard's for when you go back to play again, you're like, I'm going to learn how fucking every frame of this game works.
And just going to deflect every attack.
Exactly.
And I mean, it's good though that there's that sort of learning curve where even built into the moveset, it's not just the enemies or the difficulty selection, it's literally the moves you can do require some level of expertise to perform. That's the same thing with the those idols that you have to hit to get blue orb shards.
That fantastic idea for a game as like an unlockable thing. Like the Devil May Cry, you know, there are a lot of games, you know, there's a lot of videos. Well, there's one that I think of that Mark Brown, the game makers, you know, sort of the idea of players optimizing the fun out of games. And, you know, it's true. You know, like you play like a stealth game, or you know, like a you know, a shooter or something like that, and you will find the most obvious sort of like most efficient way to play it. So then the challenge is, how do you incentivize players to muck around? And DMC does a remarkably good job, because, you know, it sort of pains me watching some people play online. You know, obviously they're, you know, welcome to play that way, but using like, you know, combo A for Rebellion.
Yeah, they just only ever use combo A.
And I'm like, because like, just the addition of that style meter, you know, being given, you know, red orb bonuses at the end of the level, and then those idols that you can attack, you know, like some of the best fun is like building up that perfect triple S combo stream, trying to get to that blue orb fragment that's on the other side. It's just really good fun.
And I find it interesting that, you know, over multiple playthroughs, your priorities change. Like, from the start, you're like, okay, let's just like get through the levels and take out the enemies. And then on like your second or third playthrough, you start to do things like, you know, you lean into the taunting, you lean into, you know, messing with the enemies, actually like taunting them and then dodging around them and stuff. That's why I find it interesting in something like Bayonetta, when you taunt the enemies, they actually get enraged and become more aggressive.
Okay, interesting.
So you know, it changes that way where you know, the taunting is incentivized not only through the style increasing, but you know, Dante's taunts actually change depending on your style rank as well.
Which is another fantastic way to reward, you know, we're talking about, to reward like, you know, better play. Yeah. Like more diverse, you know, attacks and, you know, weapon switching and whatnot, you know, especially 5, which takes it to a new level.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same thing with the like the secret missions as well, which, like, the whole point of them is to essentially incentivize you to use different skills and you know, really bring out the most of your arsenal and make sure everything works how you think it works, and teach you all those little ideas. Yeah, so I think the secret missions is what really helps teach that, along with, you know, the style system, because the secret missions really focus on testing the basic skills to a higher level. Like, you go into them and the, you know, things like, you know, keep enemies airborne, or, you know,
keeping yourself airborne whilst hopping on enemies.
Yeah, you're doing like enemy step, like that sort of thing. I think teaches people the general gameplay basics, but puts a new spin on them to you know, teach you more advanced tactics. And that sort of thing. Like, a lot of people don't even know the enemy step is like a big part of DMC,
which is interesting because, you know, talking about taunting and whatnot as well, sort of tying it all in. I didn't taunt and I didn't use enemy step like the entire playthrough of, like, you know, all of the games sort of initially. So, you know, obviously something to go back and try that I didn't even touch, and I still had this much fun with. You know what I mean? Like, like when a game, has so much, sort of depth and sort of intricate sort of stuff going on, whereby you miss entire levels of intricacy and can go back. I think that's amazing.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's the same thing with the high difficulty levels as well. I mean, these games are the only games really, among with stuff like Bayonetta, where playing it on high difficulties actually rewards you. Like in DMC 1, I remember fondly the change up where going into the first courtyard, sort of in mission 2 or 3, instead of having the puppets there, it's a shadow like 2 missions early. So they actually revamped the enemy loadouts. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the thing in all the games as well, where you get to the point where if you get to Dante Must Die mode, the enemies actually have a Devil Trigger mode of their own. So of course you get these new additions, and there's also unlockables that actually quite change up things, like new skins or modes or things like that.
Which is great, and it's a shame that more games don't do that.
There's no incentive to play it on high difficulties.
Exactly.
But DMC does have that incentive,
which is really nice. Because like having something like having a game reward you for playing in more than like a you unlocked a level 25 breastplate that's an epic that gives you 2% more chance to not want to uninstall the game from your hard drive. Like you played the game, obviously you enjoy it. Like I know that playing it once, fair enough, you're done. But like having a game want you to play it more and reward you for it is something that I feel like is lost to like PS2 games specifically.
Yeah, well, I mean that entire genre really is based upon the games being short but replayable many times over because of the deep, areas of combat that are there, and
exactly.
The little things that add up. And
it's like a fighting game. Well, I mean, it is a fighting game in its own way, but like Street Fighter or whatever, where like half the fun is spending 30 hours mastering a combo stream to show your friends and try and get those high scores, try and get those S ranks, try and achieve the greatest heights that you can on the hardest difficulty that you can.
Exactly.
That's half the fun of these games. They're short, they're easy to replay, they're easy to get into, they're responsive. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well, I mean, this game, it wasn't actually the one that invented Bloody Palace. That was DMC 2, funnily enough. But this one, I think, has much more of a reason to play Bloody Palace. When you can actually, flaunt your skills and go against sort of the biggest challenge the game has in the sort of that survival run all the way to the end across, however many hundreds of floors are in it. And it also had the Virgil mode as well, which lets you play as a new character with totally new skills and different weapons. They're not too crazily different from the base.
Because isn't Beowulf just a carryover from the base?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Beowulf's exactly the same.
Yeah, but he gets Force Edge and then obviously Yamato.
He gets sort of dual-wielding Force Edge and Yamato, and then Yamato by itself. Yeah. So there's enough variation there in the way Virgil plays to incentivize at least another playthrough for sure.
Exactly.
Just to see how it goes, even if he is probably a bit overpowered.
But I mean, like at the point where you're replaying the game again, having a character where you're allowed to steamroll a little bit, like it's half the fun of these games again is feeling excessively powerful. So I don't think that having a character who's a little too powerful is necessarily a negative.
Yeah, the only issue I find with it is that it has the fake promise of like a real cutscene at the start to be a bit, bit different.
And then you play the game,
and then you play the exact same game again. Down to the point where the Virgil fights are literally just fighting Virgil with a red coat instead of a Dante.
Hey, I was surprised that they'd even go that far, so there you go. Wow. Just to qualify again, haven't played the Virgil stuff myself.
Yeah. Well, that's more a reason for you to go back, and then you can...
I know, but I gotta fucking play I gotta play the base game again to unlock Virgil. I just want to play Virgil straight up, man.
Chase. Well, that's why you play DMC 4 Special Edition.
Which I haven't played that either.
No.
I've played 4, not Special Edition. I played base 4. Okay?
Yeah, we made the insane...
I did the Proud Soul run.
We made the insane idea to play DMC 4, the base PS3 copy.
No turbo mode.
Slow sprint.
Yes.
And the lower Proud Soul count, as well as missing
unlock 2 moves minimum at the end of each level.
Yeah, as well as the lacking the 3 extra characters, which isn't in itself a big deal considering we're going to play it 4 times.
Considering that we didn't replay 3 for Virgil or anything like that, I doubt we would have done so for 4.
Yeah,
but so DMC 3 style system obviously amazing. We mentioned the 4, what was it, Royal Guard, Swordmaster, Trickster, and then Gunslinger. The other 2, it's not what is it?
Quicksilver and Doppelganger.
That's right. I was going to say Ragtime, but that's DMC5. Didn't use either of those ones.
No, well, I mean, they're much less utility to them. It's just sort of like Quicksilver, you just freeze time. Doppelganger, you just create a doppelganger that copies you. I mean, they're pretty simple. I mean, they're fine, cool additions, but I never really use them much myself.
No, I can't say I use them. And I think one of the problems with them is that you get them reasonably late in the game.
Yeah.
Like, I think you get Quicksilver, you get that after the chariot fight.
Yeah, so that's probably, mission 14, something like that?
Up there.
Yeah.
And then I think you get Doppelganger, like...
right before you go to hell.
Right before the end. So... you could try, but at that point you've got like level 3.
Well, I mean, you do have them for next playthroughs, I suppose.
That is true.
But I mean, I don't think there's anyone who would say, "Oh, they're more useful than Swordmaster" or something like that.
Especially as I was going to say, like you have, because obviously the styles, as we mentioned, level up. At that point you've got your style. You've got your sort of pattern down. You know what you're doing. You're not really going to want to go to a level 1 style and sort of like. In fact, I don't even think those ones that you get.
No, they don't level up.
No.
Yeah.
But yes, sorry to reiterate the style stuff, but I was going to use it as a lead-in to the weapons. We mentioned in DMC1 that there was only a couple in that. In this, though, there are what? 4 or 5 melee weapons? And
I think about 5.
Yeah. What was it? Nevin, Agni and Rudra, Beowulf, Rebellion,
Cerberus.
and Cerberus.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I think that's it. I don't quite remember.
I think that's correct.
I think that might be even a problem with 3, because I think it probably has the most weapons out of the whole series in terms of like unique weapons. Like 5 probably has the same number, but some of them are just sort of reskins of the sword.
There's the King Cerberus or whatever, that weapon, which is sort of like...
3 in 1, technically.
Yeah, 2 sort of semi-new ones, but then, basically Cerberus...
Yeah, but then something like Rebellion and Sparta are pretty much the same moveset.
And Devil Sword Dante,
and really. Devil Sword Dante is a bit
obviously,
different.
Devil Sword Dante, changes up the fact that you don't really need Swordmaster anymore.
Yeah, so... I mean, I think the biggest thing DMC3 has going for it is that every weapon is so different from the other ones, the other ones there, and they're all quite, diverse in what they can do.
I would say that if anything, they are very interesting and different to use. Obviously, you have Rebellion, which is the base sword, which functionally works identical to Alistair, just minus the electricity.
Yeah.
Then you get into Cerberus, which I really liked. Like, I think it was my favorite outside of Rebellion. Which is like you're super fast, like...
Yeah, it has good speed, and surprisingly, I think... I don't think I gave it enough credit when I first played about how useful it could be.
Well, especially in the Agni and Rudra fight, which funnily enough, that's the next weapon we'll talk about. But that fight specifically where you have to like knock out their swords or whatever to stagger them or get them to run into each other. Having a weapon whereby you can so quickly like launch off 3 different attacks in about a second.
Yeah.
Because I will say that Cerberus, whilst not offering the most mechanical complexity, I think it only has like a couple of combos, like the sort of moves that you can unlock for it.
Yeah.
But its speed makes up for that. And then Agni and Rudra, makes up for it in moves again.
Yeah, I think Agni and Rudra was what I usually stuck with along with Rebellion in most of my playthroughs, but I think they're not quite as exciting as they could be, given the fact that the dual sword thing, I think, is a pretty cool trope, but I think they're functionally just sort of like a 2-hit Rebellion kind of thing. Like they're just sort of a more sword attacks,
Yeah, I can't say I enjoyed them more than Rebellion personally, but then DMC is also like that game where you find your favorite 2 and that's what you're going to play.
Well, I think that's the problem with DMC 3 more than say 5 is that I think the weapons you find 1 or 2 that you really like and then you just ignore the others.
And of course,
completely.
And that's I think we would be in agreement in saying that is DMC's biggest flaw, which isn't really a flaw considering the fact that it paved the way for the active weapon switching in this style of game. But in retrospect, limiting the player to 2 weapons, 2 guns, and then one a style, without going to a store and changing it or at the start of the level, is probably the biggest hurdle because it does actively encourage less sort of experimentation, especially with the style system whereby you can level them up and obviously you're incentivized to stick to one at least throughout a good portion of your playthrough,
which I think is a big benefit of the Switch version that allows you to do that, which I think kind of unbalances the game as well, but it also adds
but then again, people who buy it, like obviously if you're a new player and you're playing on Switch, lucky you get the best version of 3. But I think for a lot of people, it was just having that, the ability to go back and sort of experience it with a fresh coat of like mechanics from 4 and 5.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that adds to it a lot. And Beowulf, of course.
Of course, Beowulf.
I think is probably one of the star weapons that everyone.
Well, it's Ifrit 2.0 basically. Yeah. Functionally identical, as satisfying to use. I didn't use it that much personally because DMC3, whilst being obviously comparable to DMC1, I think how it incentivizes play is a lot different. Not to mention the fact that in DMC1 you kind of going to use it for it because it it's like the new weapon, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I preferred the speed of Rebellion and Cerberus in 3, especially given like a lot of the designs in 3 are a lot more aggressive, and Beowulf requires at least somewhat more deliberate play in my opinion. Like, yes, you can punch through defenses and whatnot, but you gotta
have that wind up as well.
Exactly. I liked being able to do a lot of aerial stuff, and Beowulf doesn't have that.
Yeah. And possibly the weirdest weapon, Nevin,
which I used for about 2 minutes and then decided that it was going to take me too long to understand.
Yeah, I mean, even over several playthroughs, I've never really given it probably enough of a chance as I should have. I mean, I always go to it when I think, I'm playing on hard. Probably shouldn't bother with fucking around with Nevin because it's probably going to just be drag me down.
Well, really. Yeah, Nevin's an interesting one in that it's sort of like a ranged weapon, but it's a melee. It's in a melee slot. Sort of, I found it, it's interesting because you sort of have to learn to balance, like, obviously you don't have any sort of close quarter defense with that, so you have to sort of learn to, engage enemies from more of a distance, and then it does have some, especially with Swordmaster, some sort of closer range launching moves or whatever.
Yeah.
But, not a bad weapon at all, and of course it's very Dante, very, very Dante sort of, compatible, being a fucking electric guitar that he can play to launch electric bats or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that I'll need to go back and play again. So not weak at all, just not one that I used.
And I think that was it for the weapons.
Yeah, and then you just have the guns. We didn't go much into the guns for 1, and I don't think we really need to. You have the standards, the Rebellion, and what was the other one?
You mean Ebony and Ivory?
Ebony and Ivory. Fucking shoot me now, take me out. Ebony and Ivory.
I mean, every game has the dual pistols and the shotgun, and they usually have a few variations on it. Like the one has the grenade launcher,
which then becomes the rocket launcher.
Yeah, and the laser gun, and then and in 3 they have Cleaner Anne, which is the rocket launcher, same thing, and Artemis. And it also has Spiral, the sniper rifle, which I don't think any human on Earth has used.
I don't even know how much damage it does because I never bothered equipping it.
No, I don't think there's any really point to using it. Maybe there's probably someone out there who just done a Spiral only one.
I saw someone using it in one of the videos we watched, so it does happen. I'm sure it has its uses.
I'm probably sure it does extra damage on some enemy type or something, but I just can't. Why would you ever use it over Cleaner Anne or something like that?
I, have always, sort of stuck to Ebony and Ivory personally, just because I love DMC is one of those games where you're constantly doing something, and when you're not doing something, you're firing those 2 guns, and it feels awesome.
Makes sense.
Cleaner Anne, I remember, became, especially useful, though, in the last boss. Oh, sorry, the second last boss.
The second last boss.
Of DMC3. Probably the worst boss fight.
In the series, I'd say.
No, I wouldn't say in the series.
You think?
I'd say the Centipede takes that.
Really? Gigapede is the least favourite?
I'm thinking of them off the top of my head.
Come on. It can't be worse than Arkham. Come on.
No, I would say at least Arkham has like the gravitas of being like the second last boss.
Yeah.
Like I will pay.
I think that makes it worse, to be honest. Like, at least Gigapede's like, yeah, he's shit, but he's like, the third boss, and he's like the entry into Temenaguru.
Yeah, but
whereas Arkham's built up over the whole game to be, he's a big badass. He shows up and he's in Sparta mode, and you're like, okay, it's going to be like a one-on-one duel.
I guess agree to disagree, which is it's interesting that you have like the opposite idea, which is completely valid. But yeah, it was a letdown, but I didn't find it so like just mundane and boring. Like, at least it, despite being a very sort of uninspired design for an enemy boss, just a blob of shit, it did at least, have, as I say, significance to what was happening in the plot, was challenging for the wrong reasons, but it offered something a little bit more. It had that Kino moment of
it's worth it just for the jackpot at the end.
Yeah, for the jackpot at the end and teaming up with Virgil to take him down. Not a great boss. I would probably say second worst in the series, but I wouldn't say worst. I would say that.
Well, I mean, we're excluding DMC2, which has got infected chopper and infected tank. So
no, man, you don't understand.
I don't understand the brilliance of infected chopper.
It's a fucking metaphor on like it is taking into context things that we don't have yet to experience.
Is that the top 10 boss battles of the last decade? Infected chopper, infected tank, Arkham. Those are the
Giga.
Yeah, those are the peak right
top there. DMC Virgil with the fedora.
Oh yeah, non-fedora. He has to have it.
Have the fedora. Don't experience that, people.
All right. Is there anything else we need to say about DMC?
I don't think so. I think if we want to touch on like the environment, the setting.
Yeah.
Leading back into that whole wanting more sort of gothic architecture and whatnot, sort of similar to 1. I really enjoyed like the opening sort of city, like destroyed cityscape, and unfortunately we only get like 2 levels of that, or 3 if you want to include the tutorial.
It's a shame. I kind of wish they had a bit more of that.
Which it's funny. It's a running theme, at least between like 3 and 5 for us. Like 3 and 5 tend to settle in within about the first 4 to 5 missions. Like this one very sort of stagnant like sort of location for the characters, which is fine. And I like. If I had to pick between like the Clyfot tree or Timothy Grew from 3, I would pick Timothy Grew because I think
it has enough variety in its different rooms and stuff.
But when you get to see destroyed whatever city that they're in, I would have liked to maybe another 2 to 3 levels to just seeing a little bit more of the destruction before going hard, sort of. Demonic tower, and then eventual sort of like trip to hell in the last.
Yeah, well, that's the best part. I think in DMC 1 and 3 at least, having those hell levels at the end really add to it because it's just a different environment rather than the one you've been with the whole game.
And it sort of signposts the end as well. You feel like you're coming to the end of a journey. You've fought your way heart and soul to this climactic space, and in 1 it was like the hellish inferno of hell, and then in sort of 3 it was this really weird sort of like abstract
it's sort of this trippy like the path on the way to hell, like the very edge between hell and...
I think there was like one section where you fight like some of the higher tier reapers in like sort of a blood sort of like hellish landscape where you sort of fight them in this circular arena, but then everything else was like really clean and almost sort of like it was really like surreal. I don't know if that's the right
had sort
word.
of like it had like a really interesting sort of diverse environments. Like there's the part with the chessboard, where the chess piece pay off.
Chessboard fire is pretty good. I'll give them that.
No,
they were probably the worst enemies in the game. But
I mean, at least it's like foreshadowing for the chessboard boss fight at the end.
Yeah,
they built it up.
I'll give them the chessboard fight, 100%.
Yeah.
Fuck the angels, though. I don't enjoy fighting those.
Yeah, it's weird because they don't appear that much.
No, I think you fight them in like 2 areas.
Maybe on like hard difficulties they're more common or something. But
possibly.
It's weird that they're sort of very different from other enemies in the game. Like they go phase through walls and stuff.
Yeah, which is annoying. Like I know that it is somewhat similar to like the scissor ghosts from 1.
Yeah, true.
Please tell me I'm not butchering that fucking name. I just pulled that out of my...
Sin Scissors.
Oh, there you go. There is a name. All right, fucking... Well...
Scissor Guys, that works.
Scissor Guys. What did I say? Scissor Ghosts.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, like they did the same, but I feel like the angels or whatever from DMC3 had a little bit more bullshit. No, to be fair, I could just be shit at fighting them, but something annoying about an enemy coming through with like an untelegraphed attack or whatever through the wall.
Yeah.
Whereas at least the scissor dudes, they only really attack you in one way, and then disperse.
They're pretty easy to avoid.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, DMC3, Kino, wouldn't blame anyone for saying it's their favourite.
Yeah, pretty high up there. I can understand why someone might prefer the sibling rivalry kind of, the big break in the familiar relationship there that started it all. So I don't blame anyone for picking it as their favourite because I can understand what people might think something like 4 or 5 doesn't quite match up to what it set up in the first place.
Yeah, and, completely understandable. And you know, especially if you're playing the Switch version, which like has all the benefits that 5 has.
Yeah.
You know, 100%. You know, if someone told me that was like their favorite, I wouldn't disagree with them. And I would firmly agree overall that 3 has the better story.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Out of all of them,
Definitely.
So.
Speaking of quality stories.
Onto what?
Speaking of quality stories.
Quality stories.
Onto DMC4, which
the story's not even that bad.
I think the story in 4 they did push it to be more cinematic, like have a proper story going on here. Like 3 had a story, and so did 1. Really, they all have stories except maybe 2. But
that game has a story. It's called Ignoring Its Existence.
Yeah, but
fuck, that would have been better if I didn't stutter. Jeez.
But before, like, had the thing where it's like, hey, let's set up like all these characters, like all these different sort of factions going on. This like actual backstory of these characters.
Well, sort of 4 had this interesting thing that 1 and 3 didn't have, whereby it was obviously on a new console generation.
Yep.
You know, so it was like 2007, 2008?
2008.
2008. You know, so 2 years in to the PS3 and Xbox 360. Obviously, new player base, you know, trying to be brought in by Capcom. And introduced a new protagonist. And I would say 4, out of all of them, probably has the most going on in terms of like its plot, like in terms of like new characters that you meet out of the gate. You know, it's not necessarily tied to the previous games. Like obviously you have recurring characters in Trish, Lady, Dante, but then you get a whole host of completely new characters, and you know you play as one of those new characters for the first half of the game. Yeah. So it's sort of an interesting one where I think its story is, I would say it's probably the most certainly the most unique out of all.
I think it's probably certainly the busiest in terms of all these different plots going on, and I mean, the motivations of the characters aren't that difficult to figure out, but I find it interesting that they didn't start the game with Dante coming back to do stuff. Like, from the outset, although Dante appears at the very beginning, you play as Nero, and I think that the idea of that was to teach new players who'd never played any previous games, like, this is this game. Nero is really easy to use. He has pretty simple moves, especially in the base non-special edition.
The base version you have, I don't even know if you have a combo B. I think you just have combo A
to start with,
which is, you know, obviously, you know, they're teaching you how to use the Buster Arm, and you know, it's interesting because DMC4 has the most tutorial out of all of the games.
Yeah.
DMC1 has like no tutorial. DMC3 has a very basic menu pop-up tutorial, you know, in a very, you know, confined space that still is sort of like free and open, if that makes sense. Like, you're given a lot of room to experiment, and you can completely ignore the tutorial if you want.
Yeah.
And then I opted to do the tutorial for 4 just to see what it was, and it's a boss fight against Dante, and it's a boss fight against, you know, a single enemy who will not attack you whilst you learn button commands. Like, even 5, which had, you know, a pretty generous sort of a tutorial at the start, gave you a couple enemies to fuck around with, and it never felt like...
It never stopped you and said, hey, press triangle 5 times in a row to see how combo works.
And do it, you know, 2 to 3 times to make sure that you understand.
Exactly.
Which isn't a criticism of 4. Like, you know, I'd say they probably could have done it far more elegant. Like, you know, they literally in a cutscene show, you know, Nero fighting all of these, you know, demonic forces or whatever, you know, approaching the city. So, you know, you very well could have played that out and, you know, gone through your tutorial there.
To be honest, it probably would have been a better idea to do something like that, because when it comes to... that way you could have prepared for the Dante fight and sort of known your controls, and then you could just be thrown straight into the Dante fight.
Of course, it doesn't take away from Dante feeling like...
Yeah, like, he's just hanging out.
I know the whole point of that fight, you know, by the end of it, even if you don't do the tutorial or whatever, is that he's just playing with you out of more curiosity. And that's him throughout the entire game. But, you know, it does take away somewhat, you know, from him and from the situation when... You know, he literally won't throw a single rebellion, you know, swing at you until you've completed X number of check marks.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you think of Nero?
I honestly like him more now than I did originally.
Through the context of 5, you mean?
Well, I think 5 certainly helped, but by the end of 4, you kind of grow to like him a lot more.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because I think once you sort of master the combat style a bit more, you realize that he's given like a stupidly ridiculous amount of versatility through something like the Exceed
Yes.
If you can time those exceed charges by pressing R2.
Never could, by the way.
No. But I mean, if you get to the point where you play it enough, where you can just do it with most attacks, you can just go into those supercharged moves over and over again. That's Nero's gimmick, is that he has the Buster Arm to grab things, and he has only the one sword and the one gun, which can both be charged to do superpowered attacks.
Exactly.
And I think giving him the charge shot and the charge revved up sword, despite only having those one weapons, can still be surprisingly fun.
Well, he has
and
a lot
effective.
of like versatility to him, more than you would expect. Like if I said to you, "Oh, you're playing Dante, you only have Rebellion," no styles, a gun, and maybe one extra move or whatever. You'd be like hamstrung. But you're playing Nero, and you don't feel that way at all. You have a grab, you have the ability to grab enemies from further away. You have movement similar to Dante with his Rebellion moveset or whatever. You have a lot of options, and it's interesting for me with Nero because he feels like somewhat comparable to Dante from DMC1 in that he has half of his moveset. He's only got one melee weapon and only one of 4 or 5 or whatever devil arms. With the luxury of one, I suppose you could call it it's not really a style, but it's his sort of unique ability. But it's simple and very easy to learn, and you can tell that, as you say, it's the character to bring new players in. And then later on you have the Rev Sword, where if you time it perfectly, you can just max act and just absolutely destroy everything.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that even with a character like that, which they've obviously built to be for new players, there's still hidden techniques within that.
Exactly.
Like the context-sensitive grabs on bosses and certain enemies that have that sort of mini cutscene sort of thing. I mean, that's something that I never knew the first time I played the game. And I mean, you might not have even figured it out unless I told you.
No, I had the luxury of you pointing a lot of it out.
Yeah, so I mean, you got to that point where instead of other games which would have a quick time event or something like that to do, like an execution attack,
you are incentivized.
This game, you know what Nero's arm does
exactly,
and you know how it can be used because you grab enemies the whole game, and you think an enemy's stunned in front of you, a big boss. You're like, surely I can't grab them, but this is the perfect time too, and you try it, and of course you do some superpowered move, which not only can you do a heap of damage, but you can actually vary up with Devil Trigger as well, or his Devil Trigger.
Yeah, these games, like we've talked about it before, like have an insane amount of like little details.
Yeah, like hidden mechanics that you wouldn't even figure out.
Those boss ones aren't exactly hidden in the fact that they're fairly major, but you look at DMC5 or something, for example, whereby at the end of the game, obviously Nero's got his spoilers, and Nero's got his full Devil Trigger mode, and then you have the ability to sort of by tapping, I can't remember, I think it was the circle or whatever, like the Buster Arm, to like sort of punch and sort of grab enemies and sort of stop them from falling away. Like just insane little things that you can constantly pick up.
Yeah, so things you get. Well, I mean, in that instance, it's the final mission in the game. You get that, and then you get it for the entirety of the rest of the game. And I mean, it's even added on to because there's new moves that get unlocked for a second playthrough. Like the charge shot comes back, and some of his other moves from DMC4 come back with the Devil Trigger. And not only that, but there's even like those special grabs that can be used now with the Devil Trigger, which you can use with the Buster Arm, glove in the game on those bosses to do the special grab moves. But you don't need that anymore, obviously.
Yeah.
And if you play Bloody Palace and fight bosses that Nero never fights in the main game,
custom...
he has unique grabs on those bosses that you never see. So they put in the effort to add these animations.
Insane, like as I say, attention to detail, like off the charts. Like, and you wouldn't expect it for a campy, cheesy, action game about, dudes swinging big swords, killing demons. But then, you go the extra mile, and one of the taunts in DMC5 where Nero, loads his weapon super stylishly, you have the fucking bullets loaded and ready to fire.
Yeah, that taunt leads into actual gameplay benefits.
Exactly.
I mean, there's several other taunts that do similar things where they, they aggro enemies, or, they play music or that sort of thing.
Or being able to max act, the jumping taunt where you ride Red Queen or whatever in DMC5. Like small things. Oh no, sorry, this isn't necessarily relevant to DMC4, but
I mean, there is some crossover because in DMC4 you have the air guitar taunt where it does actually play music.
Of course.
And that sort of thing I think is endemic to all the DMCs, where they all have those little mechanics that do just add to the experience a lot more when you bother to look into it.
And it makes it feel so much more. What's the word? Like once again, you want to talk about rewarding people to play your game. You know, having this breadth of, you know, like, can I do that? And then of course you can. Like the answer in DMC is yes, you can do that.
Yeah, like it's all part of the personality and the charm of the game that adds up, and it shows you how passionate they must have been when they were making it. When they didn't just bother to make these levels, you just go them, you do them, that's it. And you can't. There's no point to playing it ever again. No, there's like. You know, there's blue shards hidden in the levels. There's secret missions again.
Exactly.
There's all these little mechanics that you can do. You know, on a second playthrough after you buy new moves, that sort of thing.
There's constantly stuff there for you to engage with and discover, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately for 4, we don't have anything else we want to add about Nero.
No, I think that covers most of it. Besides the Devil Trigger, which has a bit of a significance.
Well, of course, in DMC4, it's Virgil.
Well, it's essentially
kind of Virgil.
You get Yamato, and that creates a Virgil stand, who appears behind you and helps you.
Does some of the coolest shit in the game as well.
And
like, speaking of catching things, like, you know, you being able to grab stuff with the Buster Arm, like killing the final boss, which I was very proud I was able to do by grabbing his final launch with the Buster Arm.
Yeah,
and fucking destroying him with, like, you know, Devil Trigger, you know, Virgil's silhouetted, like, blue Devil Trigger thing going on. Fantastic.
But yeah, I think that that leads into talking about Dante's Return.
No, man. Fine. I had a better segue.
Okay, go on.
No, you go.
All right.
No, you go.
Well, the problem is with DMC4, the biggest problem with the game is that you get to the halfway point.
No, now you're just stealing it. Just go.
Okay, all right. You get to the halfway point and you're enjoying the game. You know, it's not terrible, not as good as DMC3. Get to the halfway point, and you're running through. The whole game is connected, and then Nero gets captured by the bad guy.
Oh no!
And it switches over to the main boy, Dante.
Big boy, and you play the game backwards.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest problem where you kind of hope there's something more, and I mean there is a tiny bit more, but really. You just redo the same rooms, you do the same enemies. There's just the only difference is that some of them are, like, some of the rooms are slightly varied, and some of the enemy placements.
There are you know what is it? There's like one boss fight that's new for Dante.
Yeah, technically,
which you know we've experienced before, but it's.
I mean that's not even the worst part. It's like if you're going through the old levels, fine, but you have to re-fight all the same bosses again, except the best one, Angelo Credo in the game.
Yes.
Who you obviously is dead by that point in the cutscene where Nero gets captured. So of course you don't fight him again, who's by far the most interesting boss. You have to fight all the other bosses, which are fine, but you just fought them halfway through the game, or like earlier in the game.
Exactly, and and it sucks because we talk about So now I'm going to use your segue.
Oh.
We talk about Dante's Return. Like this is the Dante that everyone wanted in 3 when we talk about retrospectively looking back. All 4 styles, active, real-time switching in-game, opening up countless possibilities, Trickster, teleport into something, switch to Swordmaster, do aerial combos, switch to Gunslinger, do the fucking twirl attack, I don't know what it's called, the Rainstorm or whatever, like, fantastic.
Yeah.
Mix that in with active weapon switching, for both Devil Arms and the guns, the guns, and insane. Absolutely
his
insane.
heap of versatility, even if he's probably not my favorite Dante to play.
No, that's fair
I think
enough.
3 is probably still a better Dante, like in terms of the feedback, but 4 certainly has his moments as well. And
I think perhaps 4's one of the issues that I found, and this is probably one of my bigger criticisms of 4, outside obviously we'll come back to replaying the game backwards. I think a lot of the enemies in 4, or at least off the top of my head, maybe 2 specifically, I found really annoying.
Oh yeah, no, that's the worst. Like, in terms of factors for DMC4, I just groan every time I think of most of the enemies in DMC4.
Yes.
Like even like the fun ones are like, they're all right. Well, but then there's so many enemies that are just so tedious to fight.
See, I don't mind the vast majority. I think that like a lot of the sort of more standard ones are fine. Like the sort of the armored knight dudes, they're okay.
Yeah.
the sort of the pinata-y sort of bag men. They're okay.
The puppet dudes.
The puppet dudes. You get the sort of the shark guys. They're okay, but then you get these 2 or 3 enemies. What were they? The chimera? Was it the chimera?
Yeah, well, the chimeras that attach themselves to the puppets.
The chimeras are fine by themselves, but when they attach themselves to the puppets, obviously they gain the ability to sort of flail randomly in spots where they normally wouldn't be able to. Sort of encouraging. I get the idea is to sort of encourage you to sort of break that habit of with Nero, for example, just going in and bustering them because it'll cancel out the buster because they hit you.
Yeah.
And then obviously with Dante you have to be a little bit more evasive, but that's just the problem, is that having an enemy which sort of randomly, in a position where it's sort of hard to see the telegraph, decide that it's going to hit you, I found really annoying, especially in something like Devil May Cry, where a lot of the enemies, you can hit them and that's fine. And generally you'll see when an attack is coming and you can sort of that's my fault. I understand that I was overly aggressive or whatnot.
Yeah.
In this, a game where you're encouraged to get close, I found that a bit annoying. Another enemy I really didn't like were those sharks, which was sort of in the ground. Not the ones like the big dudes who sort of spin and...
The ones who just cancel out the entire room of progress you've made and suck you into the underground world.
Oh, no. Not those dudes.
Oh, okay.
The dudes...
You mean the actual shark dudes?
The dudes that you fight, they're sort of they swim in the metal area. Yeah. I found them really annoying because I couldn't figure out a way to sort of get them up and out of the floor. So especially with Dante, who can't grab them, it just becomes a trial and error process of trying to just dodge out of the way and get a hit in and try and stun them so that you can get enough combos and damage to take them down. And then a couple of others.
You didn't have any issues with or I can't remember what the name is, the dudes who come out from the ground and drag you in, and then you have to replay. You have to.
Oh, I don't think I ever got by one of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, because you told me about them, and then I made a concerted effort to dodge out of it.
Because I hate those guys so much. It's just a waste of time.
Yeah,
I hate them, and I hate the blitzers as well.
Are they
the lightning
the blitzers
who can't be hit except by gunfire?
Thankfully, there's only two of them.
In normal mode, in hard, they add more.
Yeah. I can't say I was a fan of those particularly. I mean, they were more manageable than some of the other. Like at least with those, there is I know when I can attack and I know when I cannot.
Yeah.
Unless you want to do the Royal Guard and reverberate their electricity back into them or whatever.
Yeah, well, you can do Gunslinger's Pandora's Gunslinger move, and it does instantly gets rid of their shield. That's what I always did on later playthroughs on DMD and stuff like that. But yeah, for a new player especially, they come out of nowhere, and they're just such
exactly.
They're sort of frustrating enemy.
They're sort of like the teleporting lizard dudes from. I'm saying lizard dudes a lot.
Yeah.
From 5.
Yeah.
Sort of you fight them literally once in 5. I can't remember what they're called, but sort of there's a part with Dante where you...
where they teleport behind you and then nothing personal.
I mean, if you can Royal Guard or if you're using Trickster, again, I was using Swordmaster for the majority of the playthrough. The fight was, annoying, but to be fair, in 5 I sort of understood, I could kind of see what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
Whereas with at least the Chimera in 4, I felt just annoyed a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's fair. In terms of since Nero doesn't really get any new weapons, Dante does have a few new ones.
Yes.
You get Gilgamesh, which is the 5th weapon of the game.
Yes.
Which is fine. It's pretty much again the same thing as Beowulf and Ifrit. I don't really like the design of it with the weird sort of greyish with the colours. Lucifer I'm not too fond of though.
Lucifer I like the idea, but sort of like Nevin I never used.
Yeah, it's sort of the thing where you need to spend time learning exactly how to use it.
To be fair, I think I used it more successfully than Nevin, and it has some light damaging attacks from what I could tell that did work in a way that Nevin, or at least that I couldn't quite understand how Nevin could potentially work, whereby you can at least stun some of these smaller enemies whilst also deploying the bolts that you can then detonate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never used much Gilgamesh or Lucifer. I stuck mostly to the Rebellion and now I have to try and remember the other weapons in the game.
That was it.
Was that it?
Yeah, only 3.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Just Rebellion, people.
And then he got Pandora as well, which is the only
which I didn't use again, mostly because I wasn't using Gunslinger all that often.
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily need to use Gunslinger. I mean, it's okay. It's nothing too special. The only really great move, I think, is the one where you just kick open the chest and do like a heap of damage.
Yes,
That has such a huge wind up in time. It's not that useful.
Yeah. And
for
again,
most enemies.
I much prefer the ebony and ivory sort of dual-wielded pistol.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. Yeah. That's a problem again with 4 is that it's not just a Dante only game, so they can't spend enough time giving him all these heaps of weapons. But then in 5, they decide to do that anyway.
Well, exactly. But yeah, so back to the most glaring fault outside of some enemy annoyance and perhaps a little lack of weaponry or whatever with Dante
Yeah, I think 4 also suffers from some like the areas are pretty forgetful. Like you go through the town and then like the mines and then the castle and the snow and then the other castle
and the forest
and then the forest and then the last castle.
Yeah.
And you're sort of
I will say, despite perhaps not being super interesting to look at, they too look pretty gorgeous.
Yeah,
on a technical level.
Yeah, for 2008, it was very impressive.
I think we should say this verbatim across the entire series. You think about, these games which are, aiming for that 60 FPS target, and you think about, fast response and this sort of feedback above all else, being able to be in control. And you don't think pushing, what, the visuals could be achieved at that particular time. And then you go and play the Devil May Cry games, and each one, with the exception of maybe 2, and I am going to include DMC here, all look pretty good, realistically. I'm not a huge fan of DMC's Bloom thing that's going on. It is eye-strainingly bad in some spots, but in terms of some fidelity and
in terms of art design, it looks half decent.
Yeah.
But I mean that's the interesting thing though, because a lot of action games you're sort of taught along the way. It's like in the PS3 era, you get to a point where you play something like Bayonetta or you play Metal Gear Rising, you're like, yeah, these games look a bit bland. To get to this level of 60 FPS fidelity or this fast action, you got to drop the quality of everything else, which obviously is not true.
No, because then you get to 2008 DMC4, which is running on MT Framework, the old Capcom engine before they went to the RE engine, and it looks insane.
Yeah,
we only noticed 2 areas on the original version on PS3. Where it was a little bit it doesn't look that great, which may have been a concession made for the 60, which I'm sure, but the fact that this looks better than a lot of first party big heavy hitting Uncharted and to be fair, Uncharted looks good, but your Halo and stuff like that's running at 30 or sub, and this is running at 60 FPS, crisp, clean, with all the bells and whistles. It's incredible. And then obviously 5, we don't need to talk about it.
I mean that speaks for itself really in the quality they've reached again at 60 with not really any compromises made.
No, the only compromise that I can see that they made in 5 is maybe some of the levels were a bit sparse, and by sparse I mean you go from some of the interior areas in I think of Mission 2 from DMC5 where you get to go through the hotel and the lobby and that. And you get a lot of interior detail, and then in some of the later areas, especially ones where I'm not going to say the Clyfot, because the Clyfot sort of has a lot of textured detail and whatnot, and all of the roots and whatnot. But you go to the sewer or something, and there's less environmental detail going on there, and that makes sense. But all of it is rendered though. What is present is rendered in ridiculous detail.
Yeah.
And when you take into consideration, it's also running at 60 FPS, running at 1080p. With all of the particle effects and, as I say, bells and whistles. Incredible.
Yeah, I think DMC4 did a great job for its time, but again, like I said, the environments are a bit bland, and they do add in some little gimmicks, which I was never really fond of. The Grim Grips, where you have to grapple on, they're okay. It's a bit of variety at least, but at some points, with the ones in the first castle where there's the sort of spikes that hit you if you hit them, if you grapple in the wrong way.
I remember, I was going to say I struggled on one of those for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, they're a bit of a pain. And then, of course, you get the little things, the gimmicks, like the dice game.
The Beyblades.
The Beyblades.
I will say, as far as gimmicks go, 4 is the worst out of all.
Oh
of
yeah,
these.
that's what I think makes it the most tedious to replay. And then they have the audacity to make you go backwards
Do it
through
again.
I mean, at least on Dante's playthrough, it's a lot quicker.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, it cuts the fucking dice in half.
Yeah,
pretty
so
good
you
moment.
you don't have to do that. But then the problem is that happens and Dante cuts it in half, and you're like, okay, great, no more dice game.
Have to do it again.
And then you get to the second last level where you have to do that. A dice game
And
on
a
top
boss.
of a boss rush.
Exactly.
And fight the bosses again for a third time.
Yeah.
And it just gets to the point where you're just like, come on, guys.
Which is, leading back again, 4's biggest weakness is that replaying of the levels.
Yeah.
Like, and I do want to stress this. It's not that they're not fun to play, because you are playing as Dante and you have new moves and new weapons. And, even the bosses are fun.
Yeah.
But I think that the problem is that, with the bosses, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, with Nero, I think I may have sort of led into this with the enemies, but with the bosses as well specifically. With Nero, half the fun is grabbing those bosses and sort of, dealing huge amounts of damage and seeing that visceral. So, I feel like they're designed for Nero.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I think as well, is that they're very much bosses for Nero, and I'm not sure if originally, there was going to be different kinds of bosses for Dante that are more, fitting for his playstyle, but a lot of the bosses you get, you just sort of like, I just want to play this as Nero.
Exactly. And, it's a testament to the designers of Dante. It's still really fun to play as him, but it's fun despite the bosses. It's not, this is fucking amazing because this is new, you know what I mean? I was playing, the snake fight or whatever, and there's a very clear point in that fight where it's shown to you, hey, grab this spot to deal a huge amount of damage as Nero, and of course you can't do that as Dante. You're just using,
you just got to keep hitting it.
Exactly, which is fine, and you're dealing a significant amount of damage, so the fight's not hard. It's just this doesn't feel like it's intended for this character.
I find it funny that the only really unique boss that Dante has is the Savior, which is the worst boss in the game by far.
Actually, speaking of worst boss fights,
yeah,
I don't even know if you could call it a boss though.
Not particularly.
I mean, it has a health bar.
Yeah, it does have a health bar. So I mean, I think it qualifies, but only just.
Yeah, only just. But yeah, the levels, they're not bad. Again, falls into the same thing of despite, they're fun despite the fact that they're just repeats. I don't mind running through them again, but the game would be nearly perfect if it would have, as we would see in 5, if it had
more content.
Yeah. And I will say, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I hear a lot of people, I heard a lot of people talking about 4 and the replaying of the half. As Dante, and I thought it would be the most tedious shit in the world, and it's not. It's fun, and a testament to the game that it's still one of the best action games out there.
Yeah, and
it's half a game.
Exactly. Was there anything else we need to say about DMC4? I mean, the story doesn't really go too much.
No, I would say it's got second best girl in it, and then also best girl, which means that it might be a good game, Chris.
Oh shit. I'm not really very fond of most of the villains in that game, in terms of the characters of Sanctus and Agnes and all them.
I would say they're pretty forgettable.
Yeah.
I would say Agnes is pretty great, if not just.
Agnes is memorable, but he's also kind of annoying.
Yeah, he's annoying, but he has, I would say, some of the better fights in the game. I quite enjoy, not the mirror, okay, not the mirror, but the.
Hey, best boss fight, come on. It's like Gigapede, Arkham,
the Savior, Mirror,
Mirror at the top.
Mirror, you get for fuck's sake. But yeah, him in his devil, demon form or whatever. I found that fight quite fun.
Yeah, I like that.
Again, a fight which was designed for Nero, especially when
with catching stuff he throws.
Exactly,
and stuff.
But still. Quite fun to engage in.
Yeah, that and Credo I really like as well.
Yeah, Credo's really good. I always forget about Credo because he's
you only fight him once.
Well, exactly, you only fight him once, which is a shame because he's really good. Really good. DMC4, definitely.
I'd say the main thing about DMC4 is that it shows potential.
Exactly.
It's full of potential that's unrealized.
It showed what DMC5 would eventually be.
Yeah, it's definitely.
And I will say this: my dislike for it, I really like it, but like my disliking of it would have increased so much more, if I had to wait for 5. Like I can only imagine for people who played it and then had to wait,
Exactly. I mean,
10 years.
I think that's the thing. When everyone played it, they were like, "Damn, this is good, but it could be so much better if they just realized on what they had here." I really hope 5 comes out in like a couple of years, and then we can get that fully realized.
Sorry, guys.
11 years later. I mean, do we want to talk at all about the reboot?
I mean, I have very little to say.
Yeah.
I will say, I only played like the first couple of missions, as I said, because I found the entire story around it intolerable. I will say to people, if you play them back to back, if you go 1, to 3 to 4, heck, if you don't even play 5 and you just, you want to go full release order, ignoring 2 because fucking nothing of value there.
Hey man, you gotta play 2 to teach yourself how to cry. That's like when you become a man for the first time.
No,
Beating 2 is like losing your virginity.
A man cries at the end of 3. A man, only a sadist cries at the end of 2. Even if you ignore 5 and just go straight full release order to DMC, I cannot imagine you being able to tolerate it after playing the other games. Sure, if you wait 12 months and you just want to play something new,
some action game, yeah,
I get it. And as I say, the game would be fine if it wasn't a DMC game, but the problem is it seems to have such open, almost animosity towards what it was. And I get all the controversy, and the whole backlash, and I understand and have sympathy for both sides of the argument, but if ever you want to see a game which is just hurt so much by being associated with these others, it is this one. The combat is fine. I think the audio design is pretty lackluster, at least on the feedback end. I don't mind the sword effects, Rebellion and the angelic and demonic weapon. The guns sound horrible. I don't think it's a good idea, having an L2 and R2 hold to switch between 2 weapons. I understand the theory, but with the lack of a lock-on, of course, I'm trying to play lock-on because that's what I'm, sort of trained to do with these games. And it just becomes really unintuitive when you're trying to hold 16 different buttons at once.
I did actually appreciate the idea of the angel and demonic, at least the grabs, where one pulls you towards them and one pulls them towards you.
It's funny, DMC has the best combat, the best platforming. I think.
I mean, that's not really saying much.
It's not saying much.
I don't think the others particularly tried, except maybe 1.
Well, yeah, 1 and 3 had its odd moments here and there.
Yeah, a couple of times.
That rotating square section.
Oh
towards the end.
That's just.
That wasn't even that hard.
No.
But in terms of traversing an interesting looking environment, the sort of the
they did a good job with the art design, I think, which is the thing that I think Ninja Theory always has done.
Yes. Well, Ninja Theory, as shown in Hellblade, especially, if you want to talk about fidelity and what they're able to do, obviously they've got a very talented art team. Or whatever.
Yeah, I just don't think this was really particularly the right choice for them.
No, I mean, I don't even know if I'd say that. I think it's a fine choice. I just don't know why it's a DMC game. I mean, I do because Capcom wanted to, make something new that was DMC but that wasn't DMC.
Yeah.
But mix that with, these people trying their best to, create something in the legacy, in the vein of this legendary series. It's just not going to happen.
No, it's not the best idea.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway.
It's...
I mean, I think it's just really a pointless game overall. It doesn't really add anything to anything. I mean, it did have a few okay ideas, some of which did get somewhat integrated into DMC5. But really, it's one of those things where you play DMC4 and it's kind of painful because there's a lot of areas that you're sort of, it's not that fun to play through. And I think DMC is filled with more of those.
I think, and DMC doesn't have the crutch that is the amazing characters that
there's nothing to push you for. You don't want to play to see what Virgil's going to do.
I'm not even talking narratively.
Yeah.
I'm talking mechanically. I played a bit of it and I was fairly done with the combat. After playing a game where I can switch between 5 weapons at any time, alternate between ground and air combat, and, you know, fighting these awesome bosses. You know, you play DMC, which is fine in its own little bubble, and when compared to like other Western developed, you know, action games, but you know, when compared, like even like you compare it even to some of, you know, like the other, you know, like the Platinum developed, you know, like Bayonetta and, you know, Wonderful 101 and, you know, all of these other games. I don't think it holds a candle, and it's just like you are playing a game that is worse in most regards to like a whole bunch of others that are out there, and yeah, like as I say, it's not that bad, and, you know, fine, you know, in its own little sort of airtight room, but you know, I wouldn't recommend it, at least not whilst playing the originals.
Are you saying you didn't want to go and play further and unlock the shurikens or kablooey?
The shuriken? Did you say kablooey?
Yeah. There's a kablooey gun that's...
Isn't that like a TMNT quote?
Probably. No,
yo, what's up, dude? Cowabunga kablooey!
No, it's like a little pistol that explodes.
Oh. Sounds like it should be in Sunset Overdrive.
Well, it's certainly a shit gun, I'll give you that much. Yeah, so we'll skip that one. And mostly, like, you know, if you're really desperate for DMC... Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you're probably better off just like, replaying.
Look, nowadays, you can get the definitive edition, which adds like the 60 FPS, the lock-on, you know, does it increase the game speed?
You can, there's a turbo mode.
Turbo mode, you know, all that good shit. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know, play it. It's a solid...
It removes the fedora,
It removes the fedora. It's a solid 5 out of 10 or something like that, you know. Looks alright, except for the fucking overbearing bloom or whatever. Story's shit and the gameplay is fine.
Yeah, there's no salvaging the story, but the gameplay, at least I think, is serviceable if you just want some more action stuff.
Exactly. Now...
The true sequel.
I'm about to Mr. Miyagi this bitch up in here.
Jesus Christ.
Devil May Cry 5. Hold on, I need my, like, echo voice.
Devil May Cry 5.
That was the most retarded thing I've ever done in my life.
Well, speaking of retarded things, Capcom waited 11 years to finally show this game.
Man.
I don't know why it took so long.
They needed us to wait. They needed the Clive thought, how it's harvesting the blood. They need to harvest our tears.
It had to wait to
It is
to
pure
form.
condensed, like,
Autism?
desire. Yes, desire. And then it comes out. Now, a bit of context. This game came out. I have a habit of watching you play a lot of games, going, oh, it's pretty good. I'll play that one day, and then never playing it.
And I refused that notion. I was like, this time, you got to play.
Not only did you refuse it, but I remember you also, another fun fact, you've played so many games, I think very few things get you hooked and excited. Like, I see you into something, and, you know, often we'll play a game together, and you'll be like, this is alright, you know, I don't like this, and this, but I can see the value. I saw this game come out, and, you know, you finished it in what, like a day?
I think it was technically like a day and a half.
Yeah. I've never seen you so into it. And then between that and me playing it with you, you know, like sort of, you know, in the demo and sort of the little bits that you've shown me, like, no way I wasn't going to play this thing.
I mean,
I nearly played 5 before I played any of the others, just out of, like, sheer, desire and curiosity for this.
Well, I mean, I think I probably, at this point, I probably played it like 5 or 6 times on every difficulty and everything. Yeah, I mean, I certainly was hyped because it's probably the first one I think I played that properly on release day, getting it and actually, you know, knowing the full gravitas of what it was after all this time. So I was very hyped for it after so long, and I'd say, you know, to Itsuno, my expectations were exceeded, definitely.
Oh, they were exceeded?
They were exceeded.
Oh, shit.
Because, I mean, whenever something like this comes after so long as well, you're always like, you know, what happens if Capcom intervened? They lost the spark.
Funnily enough, we were watching a video on it today. I don't know if we want to go too far into that.
No, probably not.
I think it was pretty...
But I think there's a lot of people who...
understandably, you know, and in this particular video anyway, no names, but... you know, I understand that fear. You know, when something comes out, you know, however many years after, you know, the last iteration or the last, the last one came out, you know, the idea that it is somehow going to live up to the monumental expectation that everyone has built around it. It's like, if you want a comparison to it this time, and this is sort of cheating because it's not a pre-established IP, but I feel like it has a similar gravitas to it. Cyberpunk coming out in a couple of months. Like, that game has been in development for so long, and I feel like the expectations surrounding it, especially given the pedigree of the developer with, their last game especially.
Sure.
I don't understand how that game's going to meet it.
No, it won't. I mean, I think it's almost impossible for it to meet. Yeah. I mean, it makes it worse because if this game had come out right after DMC4, if it come out in 2011 or something, and it was good but not great, everyone would be like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But after 11 years and all this hype, everyone's like, you have to live up to it.
Well, it's like the Half-Life 3 of the genre, isn't it? It's like that thing that everyone wanted but no one thought that.
I mean, people like, the reboot, happened, it didn't sell well.
That's it.
DMC's done, they're not going to go back to it. There's no point for them, no profit them.
Yeah.
But I think the rumor started to grow over and over, like,
and then
I mean, it was
Dan outright told us.
Yeah, we're allowed to say that, right?
We're allowed to say no.
And I mean, even then though, you're still like, oh yeah, they're just like messing around.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen because it's just too much of a risk to create a big budget action game. Yeah.
So I get that idea, and then that was the sort of the big point I took away from the video, and then if people had that feeling, I obviously didn't have this feeling because despite being excited sort of for you, through you, and then excited in general because I like games. I didn't understand the full gravitas of what was happening. So I get it. And so for something like this to come out though, and somehow reach that level of like expectation that everyone has set on it, even to get so close as an 8 for people who maybe don't want to give it the 10. I don't know if I could give it a 10 because I don't believe in 10s out of 10s.
No, I think even for me, with the amount of things it did right, still wouldn't reach a 10.
Considering, I don't know, like it just amazes me that something like this can stick the landing. That
I mean, it's one of those things where whenever I think about it, like whenever I talk to someone about it, I want to go back and replay it again, which is something I feel for very few games. But I think just the fact that it manages to have everything you'd want from 4, but just in a better game, a prettier game, a more fluid game. I'm sure there's little things that people liked in 4 that weren't in 5, but really, there's not much more you could ask for in terms of just the base gameplay.
Exactly. I think the biggest praise I can give this game, and I don't want to say this lightly because it despite maybe sounding a bit cheesy, I think that it's probably a pretty decent way to judge a game's quality. It feels like a game that could have come out in like the PS2 generation.
Oh yeah.
Like, games nowadays, in my opinion, are not made anywhere near the level of quality that those those often smaller budget, like the condensed awesomeness and quality of those titles that came out in that generation were incredible. There's a couple of golden years there where like things were coming out that nowadays it's all uniform and the same thing.
Yeah, back then people the genres were defined by stuff that came out in that generation.
Exactly.
And these days all they can do is repeat the same Skinner boxes, the same formulas.
You still have survival horror. You have the emergence of the action, the action genre. Your God of Wars, your DMCs. You have the shooter genre coming out. You still have fucking RTS stuff coming out.
Still have platformers.
You have platformers coming out.
Action-adventure games like that.
Action-adventure games coming out. You've got, this huge, for like every genre you could possibly want, there's something there for you to play. Nowadays, if you want to play something, geez, I hope you like first-person shooters. Even then,
not great ones.
Or
a lot
Sony
of time.
first-party, third-person, pseudo-open-world light RPG games. And that's not taking away. Like, there are some gems in there, and that's not everything. And I know the indie scene is a thing, but to have a game like this made by such a big, prominent company like Capcom, especially after years of like just nothing, to look and just be everything that a quality PS2 game was from 15 years ago or whatever is incredible, and
Yeah.
I think it's the highest praise you can give something like this.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's certainly my favorite of the series, just because I think it's so infinitely replayable. Like, there's no part in it where I get this level's so boring or this part's so tedious. I mean, there's parts you go, well, this part's not that great, but even then, it's still fun to play through. That they make it
100%.
fun just because of the core game idea and all the different little mechanics that are part of it, like in the previous games. But I think they've ironed that out to make it certainly as smooth as it could be.
They've learned, and they've brought in everything that has existed previously. They've learned, they've added, the taunts are to the next level. The weapons are to the next level. The combat and the fluidity and the style switching, and it's all there. Nero gets more mechanical depth with the addition of his devil trigger and his devil arms.
The devil breakers. Yeah,
devil breakers. Excuse me. We get a new character with a new gameplay style like V. Like, everything from the franchise is here plus more, and it's incredible.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff that you wouldn't even expect. Like people going in with thought 3 characters, that's too many. There can't possibly be a way to make them all as interesting as each other, and that's true because V, I think, probably could deserve to be a bit deeper. But even so, with the current way he is, he's unique enough that you never stop and go, this is just shit.
Exactly.
A lot of people, I think, have mixed feelings on his gameplay.
Well, I certainly do. Yeah, I will throw that out. Well, do we want to? Now that we've built it up for 5 minutes, do we want to jump in? We'll do characters.
Sure.
So, why don't we start with V, and then we'll say it, go Nero, and then Dante last.
Yep, sounds good.
Right. So V, I suppose we'll do story spoiler stuff sort of later on, but V is sort of necessary to give context to his character, is the human split half of Virgil, who you gain the opportunity to play as in probably 4 to 5 levels throughout the game.
Yeah, I think he probably has between 5 and 6, depending on if you choose to do
true,
him
course,
instead
you
of
get the split one with
the choice.
Nero.
Yeah,
and his sort of defining sort of ability is he's able to summon what was it? The Shadow. Is it Shadow?
Yeah, Shadow, Griffin, and
Nightmare from DMC 1, which are those characters from DMC 1, if you can call Shadow a character, really. And fights with them in a really interesting way, whereby you're sort of incentivized to move and sort of protect V as a weak character, and then sort of at the same time control these other 3, Griffin and Shadow simultaneously, and then Nightmare sort of just does his own thing as the devil trigger.
But all simultaneously, and the balancing act, I think, is interesting because it's certainly something DMC's never done before, and sort of trying to get you. You can't stay too far out of the battle, but you also can't be on the front lines fighting because V doesn't really have any proper attacks.
Exactly, outside of his ability to sort of maybe whack an enemy with his cane, and then obviously he's required to kill an enemy at the end of
he has to do the finishing off
combo
after the other summons deal the rest of the damage.
Exactly. My thoughts whilst playing him, I found him quite frustrating at first, and to be honest, I was glad not to play as him at the end. I will give most of that feeling though to me not fully understanding how he works. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand mechanically, but I was never able to fully understand if, for example, a classic move in Devil May Cry is hold R1, push forward and triangle, and usually that's the stinger or whatever with Dante, and in the case of V it launches Shadow doing sort of like a spinning sort of blade attack at an enemy. One thing I found really difficult was I wasn't able to understand if it was V's direction or if it was the direction of the Shadow summon. I'm fairly certain it was V in the end. We sort of realized, but I sort of constantly muddle that up, and I don't know. Like, it's probably my fault for just not.
Well, I think the struggle is that whereas something like Dante, it's so lightning fast, whereas V, there's a delay to it, and you're not sure whether or not your input has actually worked.
Then the summons do occasionally despawn to sort of reset themselves on V, which makes sense because you need them close by constantly to make sure that he's not in danger, especially one of the cool touches, using Griffin to evade, to sort of fly out of the scenario, or even Shadow to sort of slide.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that also has the sort of in like the effect of constantly requiring you to sort of fiddle around and try and it never quite feels as intuitive as it should, trying to get them to attack the enemy that you want them to.
And I think by the end you start to realize that he's perhaps not as deep as he could be.
No, I think the general criticism for his, or the general consensus is that he should have maybe a combo C and D or whatever. C and D or D and E. No, C and D.
Yeah, I think he needs he only has like a couple.
I think he has 2 for Shadow, and then Griffin has a couple of his others, which I actually never used because I found the controls. I need to. That's another thing is the controls. I think the default ones aren't the most intuitive.
Not for V, yeah.
And I my bad, didn't change them. But again, probably should have been changed around. I understand like wanting to keep them the same, like the base triangle and the square for the ranged or whatever.
Yeah.
But tinkering with them, I think probably would have been for the best. Though DMC5 gives you the option to do so. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's good that at least it lets you adjust your playstyle. But I think V is definitely the weak link in the 3.
As are his bosses. I think. I don't think many of his bosses were
particularly
interesting.
I think that's the problem with him as well, is that it's not that fun to fight because you're just letting the summons do the work.
Yeah.
And then finishing it off. So the only really activity you do yourself is guiding them. And then occasionally dodging when you need to. So it sort of takes you out of it, whereas you're not viscerally in it where you are with Nero and Dante.
I think, I don't even know if it's a lack of like sort of being intimate with an enemy. I didn't find that as much of a turn off as maybe you did. One thing I found, like the thing I found most frustrating was that lack of feeling in control with what's happening.
Yeah.
If there's one thing, and this is why I don't play like fighting games, for example, is the level of understanding required to sort of differentiate between like button mashing and like sort of just what the fuck is happening, and then being able to like deliberately and strategically like import your buttons. Like I gotten to the point where I could do that with like Nero and Dante, and with V I never felt like I progressed past that. So for me it always felt a little more like less deliberate, less sort of calculated, which I thought took away from it a little bit. Still, reasonably fun.
As an interesting experiment, I probably wouldn't ask for it back unless it was changed up a fair bit.
I think they were wise in giving him only a handful.
Giving
of
the smallest amount of levels. Moving on to Nero, who's mostly unchanged from the previous game. I think they make him they give him a few new moves. I like his forward stinger thing where he does the leap, which I think is a really great addition. And he has the Devil Breakers. This is the biggest addition.
Fantastic addition. I didn't think I wouldn't like them, but like as far as considering he only has one weapon, they add a lot. Like they may as well be his second weapon,
more than that, I think they're more like consumable moves, really. They allow it to vary up quite a bit. Some like Tomboy even lets you actually change your base move set in a different way that, you play the whole game differently, really, when you're using that. A lot of contention about when they're used and you get hit while using them, they actually break, and then
I think it's a good
it just
idea.
cycles to the next one. You can't actually choose which arm to use. You can't cycle between them or anything like that. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, and letting you sort of having to plan it out. I don't know if anything would really be lost though if they let you choose.
No, probably wouldn't be lost, but at the same time probably wouldn't allow for as much sort of discovery, I would say. Like, realistically people are going to find their favorites anyway, so you do have the ability in the game to customize your loadout. So if you love, say, Buster, Tomboy, and Gerbera, you can just smash all 3 of those, buy a whole bunch, and then that can be your entire loadout. Yeah. Fair enough. But at least on my playthrough, I never bought any. So I was reliant a lot on what was in the environment to sort of, like where ragtime gets introduced in the sort of subway area. Like encouraging players throughout the game as like a drip feed comes through. I understand like the, things, because inevitably they are going to break when you're playing, at least on your first playthrough. Yeah. So, maybe giving you the option to maybe switch them out. I don't know how you would really do that.
Well, they kind of have that with like the DLC Pass to Break on, which lets you cycle.
Yeah, true.
But it's not really the same as like, style switching, for instance. I guess I understand the whole point is that you can do those super moves, which destroys it and makes it switch to the next one. So you have to sort of balance out the strengths of that, whereas losing the arm. But I think, it's something that could definitely be elaborated on in sequels. I still think Nero probably could do with another weapon or two.
I would agree with you. I think certainly if they do a DMC6, which I hope for, by the way, if they do that, and especially if they focus on Nero, like more deeply, because obviously, they won't have V anymore.
Yeah.
Well, unless they do some bullshit.
Who knows?
Who knows? It definitely needs a second weapon, I think. Don't get me wrong, fine in 5, especially considering he's one of 3 characters, but, as I say...
Yeah, if they make a new game, especially if he's only, like, the only protagonist or one of 2, he probably should have a bit more development again to that. I mean, Dante gets new weapons every game, so it's only really fair that Nero should get some more variation.
Exactly, yeah.
Especially, I don't know if the arm... I'm assuming the arms probably would return, but...
I don't see why they wouldn't.
But, I mean, the necessity of them isn't really in this anymore after getting his arm back.
I would say if they didn't return, they would at least,
have something similar.
But maybe be a new devil, like gun or something, like in the vein of, like the Pandora's box or some such.
Yeah, something like that. I can see happening at least.
A quick, sort of similar to how, some of Dante's weapons sort of appear as sort of taunts, like Lucifer being in the game as a rose, which you can use to finish off an enemy.
Yeah, true that. Well, is there anything else you need to add about Nero? I mean, he keeps a lot of similar...
yeah, of course. You got to mention the Devil Trigger.
Of course. So he finally gets the Devil Trigger.
Finally, at level 20.
Yes, the very last mission of the game. Gets it purely for just the final boss.
Like, if you want to talk about like depth for his character, takes it to a ridiculous level.
Yeah.
You get all of the old Devil Trigger moves from 4. You gain that aforementioned move where you are sort of able to stun enemies mid-combo so that you can, easily...
Yeah, essentially you can add on a Devil Trigger punch to pretty much every attack in the game, and including like a grab to pull them back. So hit them away, grab them back, and then hit them again. You get the grab that the Buster Arm normally does.
Yes.
Which can be used on every enemy.
Exactly. You still have the Devil Breakers, which you can use. I don't know how Nico fucking makes that work, but that's fair enough. You get what else do you fucking get? You get blue rose. Sorry,
you get the charge shot.
Get the charge shot back,
as well as stuff like showdown, all those extra Devil Trigger moves that just appear after you finish the game.
Like here's like once again you talk about 4 with like simplicity, to complexity in a single character. Like DMC5 is like fantastic, like in taking that step, that one, like as we say, the only way that you can make him more complex is by giving him another weapon to sort of learn and master.
I mean, even though he's still pretty much probably the easiest character to play in 5, he still managed, like it shows you that 4 didn't really understand that you could add more complexity to him without neutering that sort of newbie friendly kind of style.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think he definitely they breach the sort of the wall of basic gameplay style into something a bit more deep, without sacrificing
simplicity,
the simplicity and sort of the ability to just stick with the basic moves and succeed that way as well.
Exactly.
You can just use one arm if you want to, or no arm, and you still finish the game pretty easily, without much trouble. But the complexity is there if you want it.
Exactly right. Yeah. And then you get to the boy.
A boy. The best boy.
Dare I say, best Dante in the whole series.
Without any doubt, I think it's the best Dante.
100%.
By far. I think that the most important part of that, I think, is that in addition to keeping all the improvements from DMC4, he also has probably the best weapon lineup in the series.
Do we want to do the weapon lineup first?
Yes, sure.
So obviously, we get Rebellion for one level.
For one level before it gets destroyed.
Finally get a chance to use Sparta as like the main sword with all of the
for only one level, I think. Again,
I think it's only for like maybe 1 or 2 levels from memory, and it's not many at all.
Yeah.
Get to use Sparta, which is awesome because as mentioned, like the only other place you get to use it, I think, is 1.
Yeah, and I mean you can use it in
4 as Trish.
In 2, in 2 is Trish and 4 is Trish.
Yeah. But like never as Dante, and from my memory, never with like the full moveset.
Yeah, it never really gets anything new.
Yeah, so being able to use it, like as the main sword, awesome. I remember actually when you were first playing it, I was like, this sword looks weird, and then immediately after getting context from 3 other games, I was like, fuck you, old Jackson, this is the shit. And then goes into a third sword, Devil Sword Dante, which I am going to say it, guys. I do prefer Rebellion, but that might just be because muscle memory.
Well, I think Devil Sword Dante also the design is a bit hit and miss for a lot of people.
I actually don't mind the design personally.
I think it could certainly be better. I looked at some of the other alternative ones that when they were designing it, and some of those probably look better.
Fair enough.
But I think the utility of it probably exceeds that. I think, that's the benefit of DMC5 is that you can actually equip both at once once you finish the game. So you get, even if you prefer one over the other, you can just use that.
You can't switch back to Sparta after
you
you
can.
get
DM,
not.
once you beat the game, you can equip all of them.
Yeah. So Devil Sword Sparta, its benefit is, and I think you mentioned this to me, they almost acknowledged the fact that Swordmaster was like its sort of like use as a style was sort of like overvalued.
Yeah.
Like to the point where obviously you're going to use it because it gives you like an entire second set of moves. So they made Devil Sword Sparta. And,
Devil Sword Dante.
Oh, sorry. How many times did I say Devil Sword Sparta?
Just once, I think.
Shit. Dante, excuse me. And your launch and whatnot, and your aerial moves, etc., that you had, only with the Swordmaster style, you now have access to as a pause combo, and then obviously just
it's kind of all integrated into the regular attacks now.
Yeah,
which is not a bad idea. I can understand why people prefer Rebellion's basic moveset.
I think
instead.
It's just muscle memory. Like for me personally, whenever I wanted to launch something, I'm so used to like launching up and then using circle to sort of like do mid-air combat. Having that be default with triangle, and then having to like instead of triangle instantly bringing you down out of the combo, having to directional button down and then triangle. It takes a bit of getting used to, but so does one of his other features, which we'll come to it a little bit after we do the weapons. But certainly a solid addition. I'd say my muscle memory was like the main reason for my not using it as much, or perhaps not preferring it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But definitely fun.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about probably some of the other features of it if you want at the moment, like the unlockable move for it where you can charge it up using some parts of Devil Trigger, using like two slots of Devil Trigger, and it actually produces the summon swords.
I forgot about that.
Which is the usual the Swordmaster move, but you can charge it into Devil Sword Dante, and then depending on the style you've got equipped, it can actually change up. And
yes, of course, yes.
So you can add it, and it will block. If you're in Royal Guard, it can block moves. It can sort of move enemies out of the way.
If you're using Gunslinger, it's going to
shoot extra, and then you can even switch weapons while you've got the swords out.
Which also carries over into the charge up. Like to like for example, if you're doing like throwing jabs or whatever with Balrog, like instead of doing motions like it would with Devil Sword Dante, that like quick, swift moves, like mimicking those of the jabs that you're throwing.
And then use something like King Cerberus, and it sort of flips around with the nunchucks and stuff. Yeah. And I find that really cool. It's not just limited to the one weapon.
Once again,
literally your entire arsenal changes
exactly right.
Midway through the game.
And summon swords, people.
Summon swords.
No. Summon swords and this cool shit.
Summon swords, the hype.
And they're red summon swords.
They're red.
What was that?
So, I mean, this all comes about because of Dante's new mode.
Which we'll come into after more weapons. We're only on like the third weapon.
Oh yeah, true.
But yes, so obviously
you have King Cerberus as well.
Well, I was just going to focus again on the sort of recap surmise.
Okay.
So Devil Sword Dante completely changes how his combos work with regards to adding obviously the style into a sort of a moveset, and then with that charge, mimicking the style and the weapon that he's using. Only on one weapon, people.
Yeah.
Then we go into we mentioned it. We'll go into Balrog, which I think would be my favorite fist weapon.
You think? I think it's a lot of people actually, it's their least favorite.
Really?
So I think it's got the thing where because it's a split between the hand and the feet.
The fist. The hand and the feet. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it means there's sort of less variety overall in just the one thing. So you have to sort of switch between the two modes.
I can kind of see that
to get the most out of it.
But I found the switching fairly intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, I quite enjoy it, but I think it certainly does require a bit more fiddling around.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. Like when you compare it to the Ifrit. To the Beowulf and to the Gilgamesh, like it is very much like a more complex version of those in the fact that those were all functionally the same. But I think that's probably why I like Balrog a little bit more. Like instead of being like the super slow, heavy hitting weapon, which we'll come to in a minute because that also features in this game, it's like really, really fast. And like, admittedly, I never used it particularly well, but like being able to go from, you know, like the sort of deliberate sword cuts of, you know, of the, you know, the bladed weapons into this where I'm like a fucking boxer, and then with a single input can go to like, you know, fucking some breakdancer like carving it up on the floor and, you know, stun locking enemies.
I think that breakdancing, even if nothing else, feels and looks really good to pull off.
Especially when like the fists like heat up and do more damage or whatever, like as you land more successive hits. You know, I think is a really cool effect. So they're really cool. Do you want to do this?
Yeah, well, King Cerberus, I think, which is my kind of surprise weapon, because Cerberus in 3 never really got me too hot and bothered, but this one I was always interested from the start because it can actually transform into 3 different forms now, or it has the nunchuck standard form and also has the bow staff.
I think you get the electricity bow staff, and then you get the
the fire staff.
The fire staff. You get the with the style, the combat style, which
with Swordmaster.
There we go. Yeah, holy smokes!
And then the lightning sort of whip, 3 segmented thing is with holding down Swordmaster instead. Yep. So the unfortunate part is that because it's sort of split in 3, you know, only because of one button press, it's not quite as deep as it could be. Like, that's something I think probably would have been better off if it could change modes.
Yeah, with like the same sort of input.
Yeah, so if you had like a full mode to use more.
Well, I was surprised that it wasn't doing that, to be honest, when we first got it.
Because that way there's only a couple of moves, but you can still pull off some interesting combos. And I always like staff weapons in games, so I think that was a nice inclusion to have.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know, this one weapon that you're familiar with can also now become
these other
different forms,
other variants. For me, I didn't use it much, and that was like my biggest issue with it, is because you get it on like mission 17.
Or 16, I think
16.
So you know, at the end of 16.
But just before another, you know, sort of like the only boss rush that's in the game, well, one of 2 technically.
Yeah.
But, you know, you're probably not going to be using a weapon that you have very little experience with, or at least I'm not.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, another really cool, you know, fun weapon to play around with. I need, you know, when I play the game again, I'm sure to be using it a lot more.
And the last one, I think, is Cavalier.
Oh, now this shit.
Which is certainly an interesting weapon.
Oh, it's more than interesting. It's fucking Kino.
And, you know, you go into it and you're like, okay, I saw in the trailer that Dante has this fucking bike that turns into like 2 big-ass swords. It gives him like super hyper armor. That means like he can't be like knocked out of this combo. And you're like, this can't be fun to use. This is going to be a fucking mess.
The most fucking fun, like responsive, like the feedback is incredible when you're fucking slicing through, because that's the whole point of this weapon. Like, it is by far the slowest weapon in the series.
Oh yeah.
Hence why they give you like a sort of pseudo invulnerable mode, not in that you're not taking damage, but more where before
you get knocked all over the place.
Yeah, you don't get knocked out of your combo for using it. But like, especially when you mix in with Swordmaster and being able to ride it as a bike as well.
Oh yeah, I love that, and especially when you're in the air and you throw the bike at the enemies.
Absolutely ridiculous.
And it just teleports back to you, and it's just
it's DMC in a fucking weapon. Realistically,
it's pretty much you know, the series in a nutshell, just this ridiculous nonsense, yet still like deep and fun to use.
It's just so good. Like, there's not much more you can say, really. I mean, it has, you know, we haven't really talked much about like how the weapons function realistically, but like this has like, you know, your sort of heavy hitting slow ground attacks, and then funnily enough the bike, while slow and heavy hitting again, you know, moves obviously a lot quicker because you are, you know, zipping around the environment. And you know, despite, you know, enemies being quite quick in this game, it never feels like this is out of place or in some way cumbersome.
Yeah, it always works, and I think that's the best part about Dante's moveset in 5 is that there's no spiral weapon.
Yeah.
You know, there's no particular sword or gun where you're like, you know, this is just a waste of my time to even try using this.
Exactly.
So going into guns, I guess.
Well, going into guns, we get obviously Ebony and Ivory
and Coyote, the shotgun again.
You know, all sounding as amazing as you'd expect on the RE engine.
Yep. You know, classic, exactly as workhorse as you'd expect.
Exactly. We get the one experimental, like sort of new gun, which is Faust, a hat.
Yes, the hat that uses your currency to actually attack.
To fire. Now, I never used it. I'm not going to lie.
No, which I think it's It's certainly something which I wouldn't use a lot of. It's kind of broken when you have a lot of orbs because you can just call down. It's like biggest move is to call down a giant meteor, which can like one-shot most enemies in the game. And I feel like, you know, I get the idea is just to be sort of just a risk-reward kind of fun, ridiculous thing to use, but I never found it to be that useful. Like I never went around using it a lot.
Well, see, I was never like despite using like, you know, ebony and ivory quite a lot, if not, you know, for nothing else, just to sort of keep the combo going and just, you know, because I like using them. You know, I don't use guns all that much in these games. Like realistically, like you were surprised. I never liked the shotgun particularly. Like I used the shotgun in 3 on those sort of bat enemies, which you needed to sort of turn to solid stone before you could kill them. But that's because it was the most effective for that.
Sure.
But was never particularly interested in it. You know, use them only, you know, in situations where they're really required, like Kalina Ann on like the Arkham fight, just to make that whole thing easier.
Yeah.
Faust, to me, I would be very interested to use, but simply because it is a gun, I don't see myself using it that much. I do really appreciate like the idea though, and like you see some people doing it, like if not just to have bosses wear a hat. Whilst you know, Royal Guard and fuck them up.
And I mean, if you want to grind for red orbs, it's also a good way to do that by you know, putting it on the enemies and then getting more red orbs for that way.
Making the decision to have red orbs as, you know, in-game purchasable items, like completely baffling when you can get like a
well, I mean that's almost like the denial of the microtransactions to include a weapon like that. But I mean, that's probably what they were playing all along.
Well,
really.
yeah.
And then you got not one but 2 Kalina Anns.
So can I just say, like, so you get Kalina Ann 2 in the game as a plot thing as Dante goes to face Virgil, but if you're a keen-eyed motherfucker, or if you have Chris to help you find it, you find the original Kalina Ann buried in like sort of like this apartment sort of building,
in the rubble,
in the side, no prompt at all, and then you get the double Kalina Ann, which has its own like weapon, like
gunslinger like, super move.
I was going to say like menu introduction where both are like modeled together, high resolution models of these two together with like their own little description that's like basically fuck yeah, you found the other one cool. And then you get a fucking laser when you combine them together. Yeah. Because Nico knows what she's doing.
Exactly. She knows the good shit. So it's interesting that they even bothered to do something like this. Like, I'm like, okay, Kalina Ann comes back in like a new form or whatever. It'll probably have like some new move. But having 2 is just so like, it captures that nostalgia and also just adds like this beautiful touch.
It's another thing to piss around with. Yeah. And it's just, again, what I mentioned earlier, all of these little like this, you know, like they didn't have to have, you know, like that. Like you could just find it and, you know, you could, in any other game, well, in any other game, you probably wouldn't find the original. No. But in this, you know, they could have justified just giving it like as a skin and you can swap between whichever one you want. No, we're going to give it to you as another like feature for you to play around with. You know, I never used it and, you know, I don't really know like how powerful it is. I'm sure it does decent damage, but like the fact that it's there and the fact that a lot of these things that we talk about are there are just incredible.
I mean, I think it goes beyond that because when you get to the point where you unlock a regular full custom a couple of playthroughs in, which actually lets you customize Dante's entire loadout to the point where he can equip every possible variation of every weapon. So you can cycle between using Kalina Ann 1, 2, and both of them at once in the same, you know, system without even going into any menus at all. It just gets to the point where you realize that they just want to make this game so, you know, customizable for you to just play however you want.
Exactly.
And using all the swords at once, using all the guns at once.
Using everything that you could possibly imagine, or none of it, and just pointing at people.
Yeah, just pointing at people and using Royal Guard to fight the whole time.
Fantastic. I am looking forward to learning how to do Royal Guard. Like I admittedly, I think I may have tried it once or twice. Never used it in 3 because you had to select a style specifically. But I am looking forward to learning how to sort of more effectively do it because you look at some of those fucking skill videos. Yeah. Ridiculous.
Yeah, some of those people I think it just spent hours and hours just practicing on every enemy and every boss. So it gets a bit ridiculous.
Respect to those guys. And then we get, of course, to one of Dante's big, like, if all of this doesn't sound awesome enough, he gets a new Devil Trigger form in the form of Sin Devil Trigger, which in the plot he gets by absorbing Sparta and what's left of Rebellion.
Yeah.
And this sort of acts as like the, I really don't care anymore. I'm not going to regen my health, but I'm also going to kill you all in one, like, Dante version of Judgment Cut End.
Yeah. Some ridiculous over-the-top attacks and everything. And you have to sort of charge it up with your regular devil triggers. You have to make that conscious choice
between heals and a moderate power increase, or, you know...
full power increase.
Voldemort, Avada Kedavra mode.
Yeah. Try and fucking kill everything on screen mode.
Exactly.
And, I mean, they get to the point where it's not just, you turn into Sin Devil Trigger and you just, like, blow up everything. There's actually, like, whole moves to buy for it.
Exactly.
And it gets to the point where you buy quadruple S...
It's just a mess.
When you get to triple S mode by playing purely the best you can and just outstripping the game in every way, you get to quadruple S where you can use Sin Devil Trigger for a couple of seconds free without expending any Devil Trigger at all, as long as you maintain that triple S rank.
It's just a mess.
It is, in a word, Kino.
It is just... Insuno, you fucking madman. Like, oh, fuck. See, this is why I get upset now when I hear when I hear that Fallout 76 still has players, because this shit exists and they're playing that. Sorry, no hatred if you enjoy that game. It's just a bad game.
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty clear from all of that it's surprisingly they actually put quite a lot of effort into Dante when I thought, they're going to lean towards like making Nero the protagonist now. They're going to give him new shit. And they still did that, but Dante also got like a whole new series of weapons and variations on that, and variations on his previous moves and styles and everything, more than you'd ever expect for a character who, seemed like he was on the way out, really.
Well, it feels like, like, everything that a man that the team creatively, that a man like the director, that Insuno, that Matt the producer could put into this, they did. Like there was no, like, even in like the Capcom release, like, we want this to scream quality.
Yeah.
Like nothing was spared on this. Like there was no point where someone was like, we can't put that in.
Yeah.
Like it was like, no man, the horse's balls do shrink in the rain. Except in this, it's an entirely...
This is the horse's balls shrink the game.
Well, exactly. This is what Rockstar wanted to do, except in a game which doesn't take 15 minutes for you to find your horse.
Yeah.
Again, no hate if you like Red Dead 2. That's actually a good game, so...
And I think that carries over until like the actual story and content of the game as well. I mean... there's not a whole lot to say about the story. It doesn't particularly go in too many directions. It's very focused clearly on taking out the new enemy, Urizen, who is the demon half of Virgil.
Your reason, boy.
Your reason.
When you told me that, I lost my mind.
So, I mean, it goes from, just tracking down Urizen to him and V rejoining and Virgil returning, which is pretty much an inevitability at this point. Yes. I mean, I think everyone kind of knew that, it's probably going to come back here to have the big finale meet up here.
Well, it makes sense, especially considering it's the game that never was going to happen.
Yeah, they had a chance to do it and they did it. And I think it's important to have that for not only Dante but Nero as well, to have that sort of justification for him going Devil Trigger and getting his... his whole plot story done.
Exactly. And, we say there's not we could talk about the story for ages, but like if you want to talk about something that is fan service, I think that this is like the purest version of it.
It's very much catered to, hey, remember this thing from these previous games? Like this enemy from DMC1? He's back.
Exactly. Like, you like this from, DMC3? Here he is. You like this from DMC4? There that is. DMC1, have a bit of that as well.
Yeah, and I think they... the environments, I think, are trying to be a bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but certainly streamlined, where instead of having the platforming and puzzle elements from previous games, they're just like, let's focus purely on the action with only a few diversions from that.
Well, I think like most of the platforming stuff from what I know, now I never play the secret missions in these games, mostly because I'm shit.
Yeah.
But like it seemed like a couple of those platforming sort of sections where at least they're not touching the ground, you're sort of using the same mechanic from 4 where Nero can use his grab to sort of move from point to point. Like that's sort of optional stuff this time around, as opposed to in 4, forcing you to interact with it at every other turn to sort of help pad it out.
The main focus is on the combat, and I think that was the right choice. I would rather that than more dice games.
Especially considering that there's 3 characters and the breadth of like what's available here.
Yeah, my biggest criticism probably about the game is that the first half I think front loads all of the more interesting environments. So like that has the mission 2 in particular, which is the whole stretch from the inner city out through the hotel and then out on top of the church for the boss fight at the end. I think does a way better job on selling you on the kind of environments they can pull off rather than the second half of the game, which goes too far into
as we say, it's a lot of red and it's a lot of, which is fine, but a little bit more, if they could have maybe ventured back into the sort of the more gothic stuff, like we were talking earlier, like if they could have done like a level set in like a church sort of an area, sort of running through sort of a broken cathedral like building, just to give you a little bit
of variation rather than a bunch of Clifoth levels, which they're fine as like fleshy tentacly places, but the problem is probably more than half of the game is that. If you include stuff like Mission 10 in the prologue and that sort of thing. It gets a bit too overbearing. Same with the Urizen boss fights. And leading into the boss fights.
Well, I'll just say quickly, just sort of surmise on the story. Like the story, I enjoyed immensely, and I know you enjoyed immensely, and I think that it's brilliant in a lot of ways. I will say this: if you are not like this, and this is why it's so important to play the others, obviously, with it being 5, but like 3 is the better story in that 3 stands by itself. Like 3 works without anything else. 5 works only with 3, and you could argue with the others, but I would say 3 especially. For that reason, I don't think you could say that it's the best story in the franchise, and while I'll stand by 3, but if you like just grinning your ass off at how they can fucking tie in the smallest shit into something, like
it certainly pays off all the points that set up in 3 and particularly 4 as well. And I don't think anyone going into it really missed out on anything they were really hoping for. I know I at least thought that probably could have been a bit more of a proper finale to the series rather than... I think they've sort of left it open probably so they can make sequels.
Which I think is fine. I know you mentioned that you would have liked the big bad from GMC1 to
possibly someone like Mundus or something else behind the scenes rather than just... 2 fights against Virgil in a row in the last couple of missions.
Which I sympathise with as well, but I think that introducing Mundus would sort of take away from the gravitas that is
Virgil. I mean, they did say from the start that they wanted this to be, the Sparta family story this time. Like, that's the whole point of this story.
Man, you remember another thing that came out in 2019 that was meant to be a conclusion to a long-lasting series about a family that has infighting?
Shenmue 3?
That's not where I thought that was going. Oh, dear. Pause it off, and that's what we'll say. I don't think we need to go much into spoiler stuff because we could talk all day about that.
Yeah, that's very true. I'll just say that I think certainly really capped off the series when I thought, ending on 4 is a bad note to end on. Not because it's a bad game, just because it has so much potential that could have never been realized if they didn't take a chance and make a last one. But honestly, I would be okay if 5 was the last one. Obviously, I prefer more sequels.
I mean, more of it would be amazing, but, obviously, like if that was it, like if they had to leave it, and, we've seen with a lot of other things that there are a lot of cases where things probably should be left. I would be happy for it to be here.
Yeah, and I think that's really all you can ask. I would love to see what they can do with what they've set up in 5, but, there's a lot more worth in leaving it at 5 and just saying, this is what we want. This was like our last big passion project for this series. And I think we captured everything we needed to. And I can't really ask for more than that.
And I think if not for anything, it'll be in Suno's last venture into the DMC thing. So even if it's not the end, I hope it's not, but at the same time, it's sort of a weird feeling. Like you want it to keep going, but you don't want it to be taken.
Yeah, I mean, you realize at this point that DMC4 was a bit hollow afterwards, but DMC5 I think leaves you satisfied, and you're happy that it happened.
So if anything, the fact that Insuno was able to himself cap it off like it is. You know,
Yeah,
even if it does continue, we got this ending.
The promise of him, making good on his promise to, exceed those expectations. I think the fact that he could do that, given everything it happened so far, they could have easily have done something, gone the wrong way and bombed.
Well, given the environment, making games is no longer what they used to be. Games nowadays argue that they need to sell us, season passes, pre-order DLC, in-game DLC, microtransactions and whatnot to exist. And then this game comes out, and I know that it does have in-game purchases, and that's unfortunate. But for it to be, so insignificant in the fact that, it is literally I have not seen something in a game not needed.
So barely even there that you forget it
exactly
exists.
So something like this, as I say, it's a PS2 game that came out in 2019. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And mentioning, how you say 4, how it would have been a sourdough. I think it's so cool that, it takes something that people weren't on board with, with Nero, where at best they're oh, he's fun, and validates his character so much.
Yeah, they could have easily just abandoned him and just made a pure Dante game again. But no, they accepted it and they improved on what they had and made him a more likable character.
Exactly,
while they're at it.
And they built again, talking about the way that this series embraces itself. They built around him as a character, the development. Dante Shaw was in the game. But really, it was Nero's game. If you really
it was his story. Yeah,
the fact that they take Virgil, a fan favorite character, one of the greatest antagonistic forces in video games, and Dante, this character who we've played as for the better part of 20 odd years, and then managed to fit Nero so neatly into this to the point where it is his game and they write it around Virgil and Nero and Dante's there and it all fucking works. When Nero was the shaggy head, sort of newcomer to the series in 4, which people weren't sure about. I think that's fucking how do you do that? How do you take something like that?
It's the Japanese way, man. It's just that weirdo passion and just trying new things. And I think just the level of dedication they have to obviously making every little piece work and making all these ideas actually function in a way, not just throwing them in because they can, but because they want to flesh out every little piece of everyone's moveset, every kit you've got, so that no character is it feels half baked, they just came up with an idea and just couldn't be bothered to finish it up.
Exactly.
So I couldn't really ask for too much more from that. So I hope there's more to come in the future, but if there isn't, I probably am satisfied with what it is.
Absolutely.
So all in all, I give the DMC series triple S.
I don't think you can give it anything lower, really.
It's just
warts and all, failures and all, triple S.
Nothing's perfect, but for an action game series, pretty damn close.
Look, I'd much rather 2 bad sort of eggs or whatever, or 1 bad egg and 1 mediocre sort of obnoxious egg that you're not quite sure if it wants to be an egg, but that's okay, than Assassin's Creed 17, the same game since 2009. So
DMC 2 is a core part of the series, okay? Without it, we wouldn't have had wall running. We wouldn't have had the fire bat enemies from DMC 5. We wouldn't have had Infected Chopper. And frankly, without Infected Chopper, nothing's worth it. Nothing.
Tinder would have been worse without Infected Chopper.
Life would have been worse without Infected Chopper. And frankly, that's okay by me. I would have been happy with just leaving with Infected Chopper. He should have been the final boss.
I think I'm gonna fucking kill you. Okay. I think it's nearly over.
All right.
So do we have anything more? I did cut you off there. You did have a thought about 5, but I think we may have surpassed that.
That's right. I think we've passed it now. I think we've said what we need to say.
Yep.
And I think we'll leave it with that.
All right, lads. If you don't own 6 copies of these games, I demand that you go and do it. I'll be at your house in about 5 minutes.
You are so fucking terrible at ending this shit.
Well, cut it then, and we'll do it again.
No, I'm not cutting it. I'm not cutting it. Because
this better not be in the fucking video.
Oh, it's going to be in there. This is how we roll. This is how we roll. Okay. All right. That's it.
Jackpot.
Let's rock, baby.